It was the summer of 2011 when my then-girlfriend, Emily, and I decided to spend a day at Redwood State Park. It was one of those warm, late June days when the sun hangs high and the air smells like pine and earth. We'd been together a little over a year but not yet living together, and this was one of our first real trips out into nature alone. No phones, no distractions, just the two of us in the woods. Redwood State Park was only about an hour's drive from our apartment in Salem, Oregon. The park was known for its tall evergreens, twisting trails, and peaceful picnic spots. We packed a small backpack with some sandwiches, fruit, water, and a hammock we'd bought a few months earlier. It was one of those lightweight camping hammocks that fold down small, but strong enough to hold two people. We arrived late morning. The parking lot was almost empty, and the air was cool and fresh. We found a trailhead that led to a quieter area, away from the main picnic zones and the few other visitors we could see from a distance. The trail was soft dirt underfoot, lined by ferns and thick underbrush. Every step was cushioned by years of fallen pine needles. The sun was high, casting dappled light through the canopy above. We walked slowly, hand in hand, chatting quietly about small things, like the upcoming 4th of July weekend and what movies to see next. Emily always had this way of noticing small details, like how a cluster of mushrooms glowed faintly white or how a certain bird called with a rhythm that reminded her of a song she liked. I liked seeing the woods through her eyes. After about an hour, we found the perfect spot. It was a small clearing just off the trail, surrounded on three sides by tall trees and thick bushes, with a patch of soft mossy ground beneath a giant cedar. The sun streamed in through the branches, warming the clearing just enough to feel cozy without being hot. We set up the hammock between two strong trees. Took a few tries to get the straps right, but eventually it hung just low enough to the ground so we could climb in without too much trouble. We laid out our picnic blanket next to the hammock and unpacked the sandwiches and fruit. We ate slowly, savoring the quiet and the smell of pine and damp earth all around us. The world felt far away. No cars, no city noise, just the rustle of leaves, the occasional bird call, and the gentle hum of insects in the warm air. After eating, we lay down in the hammock together, tangled up and comfortable. The gentle sway of the hammock was soothing, and the sounds of the woods made it easy to relax. We didn't talk much. Sometimes the best moments don't need words. The sun began to dip low, a warm orange glow filtering through the trees. We lost track of time in that quiet, peaceful moment. Soon, the golden light softened into dusk. I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, Emily was shaking me gently, signaling for me to be quiet. The fading light made it hard to see much beyond the clearing. I blinked a few times, adjusting to the dimness, and noticed how alert she looked, her eyes sharp, her whole body still and tense. She held a finger to her lips and pointed off into the shadows beyond the clearing. I listened. At first, there was nothing but silence. The kind of silence that feels so thick you almost want to speak just to break it. The sun had set by now, and though the sky still had a faint blue glow, the woods around us had turned nearly black. Then came a sharp snap, the unmistakable sound of a branch breaking. It was far away, somewhere deeper in the trees, but close enough to make the hairs on my neck stand up. We both held our breath. The silence returned, pressing in around us. Then, another crack, closer this time, from the same direction. It was the sound of footsteps moving through dry twigs and leaves. A crunch came from the other side of the clearing. We looked at each other, eyes wide. Our bodies tensed instinctively, hands moving to the small pocket knives we each carried. The blades were nothing more than a few inches long, but in that moment, they felt like our only defense. We debated silently whether whoever or whatever was out there knew we were here. Should we run? Should we hide? The flashlight we had was inside the backpack, but turning it on could give away our location. The footsteps grew louder, faster, closing in around us from multiple directions. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then came a sudden, sharp crunch directly ahead. We froze. Emily tightened her grip on my arm, the only part of her I could see clearly in the faint light. After a long moment, she whispered, not really to me but to whatever was out there, "We know you're out there. Silence fell like a heavy curtain again. I fumbled in the dark, grabbing the flashlight and clicking it on, shining it toward the noise we'd last heard. The beam cut through the shadows and revealed 3 deer, startled and scrambling away into the black. Relief hit us like a wave. We laughed quietly, almost embarrassed at how tense we'd become. We packed up quickly, moving as quietly as possible. The woods seemed to hold no more secrets for us that night. When we reached the car, the lights from the parking lot felt like a safe harbor. That night stayed with me for a long time. The way the quiet could suddenly turn sharp and threatening, how small sounds became warnings in the dark. It reminded me that the woods are alive with things you can't always see clearly, and sometimes, just sometimes, they want to remind you of that. It was the summer of 2013, and I was 15 years old. My dad and I had driven out to this remote campground near Lake Sylvan, a place deep in the northern woods of Minnesota. We had been coming to this spot every summer since I was little. The campground was quiet and small, surrounded by dense pine trees, and the lake sat just on the edge of the grounds, glistening softly as dusk fell. I loved the peace out there, the smell of pine needles, the fresh air mixed with the faint scent of water, the sound of birds getting ready to sleep. It was perfect. That year, my dad and I decided to hike one of our favorite trails that ran along the lake's edge. The trail was narrow and overgrown in spots, winding through thick underbrush and tall trees. It wasn't marked well, but we knew it well enough. If you kept going far enough, the trail led to a small waterfall, a secret spot we had found years ago. The waterfall was a hidden gem. The water spilled over smooth rocks into a clear pool below, and the sun would catch the spray just right, making everything sparkle. We packed light, just a couple of water bottles, some snacks, and a small first aid kit. The air was warm but cooling down as the sun began to set. The sky turned a dusty pink, fading into deep blue. The forest around us grew quieter, the sounds of insects rising to fill the space. We stepped carefully on the trail, our boots crunching over dry leaves and twigs. About 30 minutes in, we reached a part of the trail where the trees opened up slightly, and there was a large slash pile, dead branches and logs stacked roughly at the side of the path. What caught my eye was something strange sitting on top of the pile. A small, worn-out kid's shoe. It was scuffed and dusty, the kind of shoe a little boy might wear, maybe size 4 or 5. It didn't look new, but not too old either, like it had been left there recently or maybe forgotten. I picked it up carefully. The shoe felt light, empty. I looked around for any signs of a child, but the forest was still and silent except for the distant call of a bird. My dad noticed the shoe and frowned. We both felt a little uneasy, but I told myself it was probably just something someone dropped and never came back for. Maybe a kid had been there earlier in the day. We moved on. The trail narrowed as we got closer to a small clearing. The clearing wasn't big, maybe 20 feet across, surrounded by tall trees and thick bushes. My dad said he needed to take a break, so he stepped to one side of the clearing behind some bushes. I moved to the other side, giving him some privacy. The sun was almost gone now, and the shadows of the trees stretched long. That's when we both heard it. A small, clear voice, soft but loud enough to carry, "I'm over here." It was a child's voice, young, maybe 6 or 7 years old. It wasn't a shout, but not a whisper either. It sounded close, like someone was calling to us from somewhere in the clearing. My dad looked at me first, thinking maybe I was messing around or calling him. I shook my head slowly. Neither of us moved at first. The voice came again, same words, same tone. It didn't sound like it was coming from the bushes right next to us, but somewhere deeper in the clearing. I scanned the area carefully. There was no one visible. No movement, no shadows that didn't belong to the trees. My dad called out softly, "Hello? Is someone there?" No answer. We spent nearly half an hour searching the clearing and the nearby woods. We called out, moved branches aside, and looked behind every tree. But no one was there. It was like the voice had just vanished. Something didn't feel right. The shoe, the voice. It all added up to a strange and uneasy feeling that settled deep in my stomach. We decided to give up on reaching the waterfall. The light was fading fast, and the woods were growing darker by the minute. We turned back the way we had come, walking quickly but carefully. That's when the sounds started. At first, it was small, twigs snapping quietly behind us, bushes rustling as if something was moving through them. I would stop and look back, but all I saw was empty forest. My dad was tense too, glancing over his shoulder now and then. The snapping of twigs grew louder, closer. It didn't sound like animals, it was heavier, deliberate. Something was following us. We kept walking, trying not to panic, staying close together. The trail was dim, and the shadows seemed to shift unnaturally. Every now and then, I thought I saw movement just beyond the tree line, but when I blinked, it was gone. We made it back to the campground without seeing or hearing anything more, but the feeling stayed with us. After that trip, my dad and I never went back to that campground or trail. The memories of that night stayed with me, especially that small shoe and the child's voice calling out from the dark woods. Even now, years later, I can still hear the voice sometimes in my mind, clear and real, and I wonder what or who was really out there with us that summer evening. I've always been a night walker. Ever since I was a teenager, the quiet of the night felt less lonely than the buzz of the day. It was easier to think, easier to just be. I live in a small town. Not much traffic, mostly old houses and empty streets after dark. The kind of place where people lock their doors early and don't bother looking outside. It was late August 2023, and I was 29 then. My job was a regular desk job, 9 to 5, so nights were my time to clear my head. On this particular night, I left my apartment at around 1:30 a.m. It was summer but cool enough that I wore a light jacket and my usual worn-out sneakers. I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to walk. I started on the streets I knew well, the kind of quiet suburban lanes lined with maple trees that cast long shadows under the street lamps. The hum of the town at night was soft, just the distant sound of a dog barking somewhere, a car now and then far away, and the wind moving through the leaves. I liked walking this time of night because no one was around to bother me, and I could think about things without interruptions. I wandered for about 30 minutes, walking through side streets and parks, my footsteps muffled on the cracked sidewalks. Around 2 a.m., I decided it was time to head back to my place. The streets I had been on were familiar, but I took a slightly different route back just to mix things up. That's when I noticed the van. At first, I thought nothing of it. A black van, old and a bit scratched, rolled slowly down the street. It wasn't unusual for people to drive at this hour, but this van moved differently, more like it was looking for something or someone. It didn't speed, just crawled along, its engine a low rumble that I could hear clearly. I kept walking, my eyes on the sidewalk, trying to ignore it. But then the van came back down the same street, this time slower, closer. I looked up, but I didn't see anyone inside. The windows were tinted so dark I couldn't see a thing. I wasn't sure if it was the same van, but the shape and color were the same. Still, I told myself it was probably just coincidence. Maybe someone was lost or just driving around late like me. I kept my pace steady, but a little faster. About 10 minutes later, I saw the van again. This time, I was sure. No license plates. That's what caught me, no plates. The van rolled slowly past me, as if it was watching. My heart started pounding, and I picked up my pace. Something about the whole thing didn't feel right. I started to walk faster, almost a jog, but I didn't want to run just yet. I wanted to see if it would just drive away, but it didn't. The van came back down the street again. This time, it stopped right in the middle of the road, just a few houses ahead of me. I froze, staring at it. The engine was quiet, but the van didn't move. I quickly turned and started to run. I made a few quick turns, zigzagging through the streets, heart hammering in my chest. My breath came fast. I didn't know where I was going, but I needed to get away. After running down a few side streets, I slipped into someone's yard behind a tall wooden fence. The yard was small and cluttered with flower pots and a broken lawn chair, but it gave me cover. I crouched down behind the fence, pressed my back against the wood, and tried to calm down. Minutes passed. The silence was heavy. My mind raced with every possible thing the van could mean. Was it someone watching me? Following me? What if it wasn't just a van? What if they had bad intentions? Suddenly, the van's engine started again. I heard it roll slowly down the street past the house I was hiding behind. It didn't stop. After what felt like hours but was only minutes, it drove away. I waited a good 20 minutes more to make sure it was really gone. When I finally felt safe enough, I ran home as fast as I could, my breath short and legs shaking. I practically threw myself through my bedroom window, slammed the door, and locked it. I sat on the floor, back against the wall, trying to make sense of what had just happened. The street was quiet again, but I knew something had changed. Something out there was watching, and it wasn't random. The next day, I called the police and reported the van. They said there had been a few complaints in the neighborhood about the same black van, but no one had been able to catch it. The officers told me to be careful, but also said I might have just been paranoid. Still, I haven't gone walking late at night since then. Sometimes I still think about the van and what it was doing, and I realize how lucky I was to get away. The night is quiet and calm, but that night proved it can hide something dangerous. And sometimes, it's not a ghost story or a fairy tale, just real people who shouldn't be out there. I had planned this hike for months. I needed a break from everything, the noise, the stress of my job, the constant buzz of people. I wanted silence, alone time, and the raw, untouched feel of the forest. Southern Oregon's wilderness seemed perfect. It was early August, the sun was warm but not hot, and the trails were quiet on a weekday morning. The perfect place to clear my head. I started early, around 7 a.m., parking my old, battered Jeep at a small trailhead near a stretch of the Rogue River. The spot was isolated, no cell signal, just the winding dirt road and a few scattered hikers now and then. I carried my usual backpack, water, some trail mix, a first aid kit, a map, and a small pocket knife. Nothing fancy, nothing heavy. I wanted to move light. The trail was rocky in parts, lined with tall pine and fir trees, the smell of damp earth thick after last night's rain. The river ran close by on my left, gurgling softly over rocks and fallen branches. Birds chirped high above, and the occasional squirrel dashed across the path. I walked steadily, losing myself in the rhythm of my boots against the earth. About an hour in, the trail curved sharply around a ridge, and I could see a clearing ahead where the sun struck through a break in the trees. I decided to take a short break there, sitting on a flat rock and sipping water. The forest was peaceful, but I noticed something strange, the faint sound of a vehicle engine in the distance. At first, I thought it was my imagination or maybe someone on a far road, but the sound grew louder, closer. I glanced up the dirt road leading back to the trailhead. That's when I saw the two dark SUVs pulling up fast, tires kicking up dust. They stopped abruptly near my Jeep. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't know who they were, but the way they moved, quick, purposeful, didn't feel right. My heart started pounding, but I kept calm. I grabbed my pack and started moving back down the trail, faster now. The SUV's doors slammed open, and I heard shouting, though I couldn't make out the words. My legs felt like they were on fire as I pushed myself through the underbrush, the dense forest thickening. I realized I was being followed. I never thought a simple game of manhunt could turn into one of the most frightening nights of my life. The year was 2014, and I was 18 years old, just out of high school. My friends and I lived in a small town in Oregon, surrounded by endless forests and parks. One place we loved to hang out was the large city park on the edge of town, an open space with tall trees, a big hill, a winding trail, and a pavilion at the top. It was the perfect place to play manhunt, a twisted kind of hide-and-seek with tag that we played late into the night, sometimes until dawn. We had a group of about 10 friends, all close, all used to these games. The way it worked was that 3 people would start as it, and everyone else would scatter into the shadows. When it found someone and tagged them, that person became it too, and we kept chasing until only a couple of players were left hiding. Then the game would reset and we'd start again. It was a simple idea but felt like a mix of adrenaline, fear, and fun all rolled into one. One night in late October, The air was chilly, the sky was clear, and the park was dimly lit by scattered lampposts and the moon. I was it with my good friend Jake and his younger brother, Tommy. Jake was 19, tall and quick with sharp eyes, and Tommy was just 15 but fast and fearless. The three of us decided to head toward the middle of the park, to the big hill where the pavilion sat at the top. That spot was known as a hot spot for hiding, with bushes, trees, and the steep stairwell that climbed the hill, making it a perfect place to lose whoever was chasing you. We started walking down the long concrete stairwell that led up the hill. The stairs were wide but uneven, worn out by years of people walking up and down. The cold air bit at my cheeks, and the dry leaves crunched softly under our feet. We were halfway down, scanning the park below us for movement. The darkness made it hard to see, but our eyes adjusted. Suddenly, about 50 feet below us on the grass, we spotted two figures standing side by side. They looked like two people from our group, waiting or maybe hiding. Jake raised his voice to call out, "Hey, who's that?" Usually, this was where someone would shout their name and then take off running. But instead of a friendly shout, we got a strange answer. A harsh voice barked back, "Who the fuck are you?" That cut through the night like a knife. It wasn't like any of our friends. The voice was rough, cold, and filled with anger or maybe warning. The two figures suddenly started moving toward us, fast. At first, we thought maybe it was part of the game, so we began to sprint down the stairs to tag them. But then something changed. They were sprinting at us too, faster than anyone we knew could run. My heart slammed against my ribs. Tommy stumbled a little as he tried to keep up. Jake and I exchanged a quick look, the same gut feeling telling us this was no longer a game. We immediately turned around and started sprinting back up the stairs, adrenaline exploding through our veins. The stairwell felt like it stretched on forever. The pounding of our feet echoed against the concrete. The cold night air burned my lungs as I gasped for breath. I could hear heavy footsteps behind us, too close. Turning around, I caught a glimpse of the two strangers. They were less than 10 feet behind us, moving so fast it didn't make sense. They closed the gap impossibly quick. We reached the top of the hill and burst out of the stairwell into the pavilion area. The moonlight revealed the open field beyond. I paused to look back, half expecting them to stop or hesitate. But no, they kept coming, fast and silent. Their faces were hard to make out, but something about them felt off. Too quiet, too determined. Without saying a word, we bolted across the field, aiming for the park trail that ran around the perimeter. That trail led to a nearby neighborhood where one of our friends lived, our usual meeting spot between rounds. It was about 2 miles from where we were, a long run on uneven ground, but we had no choice. If they caught us, we didn't know what would happen. We ran as if our lives depended on it. Every step was agony. My legs burned, my chest heaved, but I kept pushing. Every few seconds, I risked a glance behind. The two strangers were still chasing us, keeping pace, never slowing down. It was like they had endless energy. Their dark clothing blended with the night, making them look like shadows chasing shadows. At one point, the trail curved around a thick patch of woods. I stumbled on a root and almost fell. Jake grabbed my arm, pulling me up. Tommy was breathing hard but kept going. The fear was more than just a feeling, it was pure survival instinct. The whole time, my mind screamed that we needed to get away, to reach the street and safety. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, the trail opened up onto a quiet suburban street. Houses lined the road, and streetlights cast a soft yellow glow. We slowed down, hearts pounding, but still glanced behind. The two strangers were gone. No sign of them anywhere, just silence. We reached the house of our friend Mark, where the rest of the group was supposed to be waiting. When we got there, we found the others lounging on the driveway, laughing and joking, unaware of what had just happened. We told them everything. Some laughed it off, saying it must have been another group of people messing around. Others looked worried and wanted to go back and search the park, but we all agreed it was too dangerous. No one knew who those two people were or why they chased us so fiercely. We never saw them again. That night changed everything. Our games stopped after that. The park didn't feel like a fun place anymore, just a place full of unknown threats. I still wonder who those two were and what they wanted. The fear, the speed they moved at, the coldness in their voices. It all felt too real, too close. No game is worth that kind of terror. It was the fall of 1998. A chill lingering in the air, just enough to remind me that winter was on its way, but not cold enough to force me to wear more than a thin jacket. I was 29 years old then, working at a small hardware store on the outskirts of town. A quiet place with a steady flow of regular customers, nothing too busy and certainly nothing exciting. Most nights, I clocked out at 7 p.m., and the walk home was just a routine. Took me about 25 minutes, and I usually took the same path. The street that led from the store to my apartment was a narrow road flanked by old, worn-out houses on one side and a patch of woods on the other. To avoid the noisy traffic and bright streetlights, I usually cut through the little trail behind the railroad tracks. It was a dirt path, worn down from years of footsteps and bicycle tires, shaded by tall pine trees that swayed lightly in the breeze. At 7 p.m., it felt safe enough, quiet but not scary. Sometimes I'd pass a jogger or a dog walker, but more often than not, the trail was empty. That night was different. I had covered a shift for a coworker who needed a day off, which pushed my time out the door to nearly 11 p.m. By then, the streetlights blinked like tired eyes, and the chill felt sharper, biting into the exposed parts of my skin. The quiet along the trail felt heavier, like the trees themselves were holding their breath. There was no moon, just the thick black sky dotted with stars. The air smelled of wet leaves and dirt, mixed with the faint smoke from a nearby chimney. I stepped onto the trail with a familiar rhythm, boots crunching on fallen pine needles, a faint rustle as a squirrel darted across the path ahead. It should have been just like every other night. But as I walked deeper into the woods, I noticed something unusual about the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It felt staged, as if the quiet was masking something underneath. About 10 minutes in, past a sharp bend where the trees crowded close, I saw him. A man lying on the ground beside a bike. The bike stood upright, balanced neatly on its kickstand. His body was sprawled awkwardly on the dirt, one hand clutching his stomach, the other resting limp on the ground. At first glance, I thought he was hurt, maybe fallen off the bike or struck by something. But then I heard it, a low moaning, weak and drawn out. It didn't sound like pain. Not real pain. It sounded like the fake moans a child makes when they don't want to go to school. A sound meant to pull at sympathy more than express actual suffering. He saw me and raised his head just enough to look in my direction. His eyes were glassy, unfocused but trying to lock onto me. He called out, weak but clear enough. A call for help. I stopped dead in my tracks. A knot formed in my stomach. Something didn't add up. The bike wasn't tossed aside in a crash. It was standing properly, the kind of detail someone who had just fallen wouldn't bother with. The moaning was suspiciously fake, and the way he looked at me didn't feel like someone begging for help. Felt like someone waiting for me to take the bait. My instincts screamed at me to turn around. I did. I started moving back toward the street, my heart pounding loud enough that I thought it might echo through the trees. That's when the quiet shattered. I heard a shuffle behind me, the soft scrape of tires against dirt and gravel. Then his voice, sharp and angry, cut through the night air. "I'm gonna kill you, motherfucker." The suddenness of it hit me like a punch to the chest. He jumped up and shoved off his bike, the wheels spinning as he surged toward me. I was already halfway up the small incline that led to the railroad tracks, the faint glow of the street just beyond them flickering in the distance. I didn't look back. I ran. The ground was uneven, roots and stones hidden beneath the dark soil, but I kept my footing, pushing harder with every step. He was close behind me. Then came the crash. I heard the screech of tires against metal and wood as his front wheel slammed into the railroad tracks. His body pitched forward violently, and I heard the sickening thud as he hit the ground. The moaning returned, but this time it was real. Pain, not pretend. I kept running until I was over the tracks, finally reaching the safety of the street and the faint buzz of a gas station sign. There was a payphone nearby, an old relic in a world of cell phones that weren't yet everywhere. I fumbled for coins, hands shaking, and called the police. When they arrived, the officer was kind but didn't seem surprised. He explained that the man was known in the area, a local with a long history of petty crimes and schemes to rob people using that exact same trick. Apparently, the fake injury was a ploy, a way to get close, and when victims hesitated, he became violent. They'd found him like this many times before, caught after a failed attempt, sprawled on the ground, moaning for real from his own mistakes. The officer told me I was lucky. Most people didn't get away that fast or weren't so cautious. He laughed when I mentioned the death threat, said the guy had threatened plenty before and had gotten his ass kicked enough times to know it didn't work. I walked the rest of the way home that night with the cold settling deeper into my bones, my mind racing through the dark. I thought about how easy it could have been for things to go differently, how the quiet woods could hide danger lurking in plain sight, and how sometimes the things that seem real might be the most dangerous lies of all. I had just finished school that spring, early May of 2012, and moved to a small town in northern Idaho for a short-term internship. I didn't know anyone around. The town was surrounded by thick woods and rolling mountains, with little development once you left the main road. There were a few trails people knew about, the kind marked on maps or with brown wooden signs. But the locals told stories of old game trails and old paths used by herders and hunters decades ago. I had always liked to hike and didn't mind going out alone. Honestly, I preferred it. One August morning, the kind where the sun is already hot by 9 a.m., I decided to take a lesser-known trail I'd found by studying an old topographic map and comparing it to aerial satellite images. It wasn't a real trail, not maintained or marked, but I noticed a faint outline of a path along a creek that twisted through the forest and into higher elevation. The area was part of a designated wilderness zone, and I'd read that official trails nearby were limited to protect the terrain and wildlife. That meant it was likely nobody else would be back there, which sounded perfect to me. I packed a small day pack with water, a granola bar, a knife, some bug spray, and a simple first aid kit. I wore old canvas hiking shoes and long pants. The pants were because I'd read that ticks were a real problem in the tall summer grass, especially out here. I had a lightweight long-sleeve shirt and a ball cap. That was it. No cell service out there. I didn't expect to need anything fancy for what I figured was just a long hike through the woods along a stream. I parked my car off the side of a gravel Forest Service road and started walking. The trail wasn't easy to follow, but you could see where elk or deer had kept a faint footpath alive through the tall grass and between spruce and lodgepole pine. The sun was climbing fast, and even with shade now and then, it felt like the air thickened as I walked. My shirt clung to my back within 20 minutes, soaked in sweat. Mosquitoes buzzed around my ears every time I slowed down. The stream was the best part. It cut through the grass like a polished ribbon of silver, clean and cold, the kind of water that makes your teeth ache just to touch. Sometimes the bank dropped off steep and the water flowed quick, white with froth. Other times it widened and slowed, deepened in spots, and ran smooth. Spruce trees lined the banks in some sections, their lower branches brushing the water. Wildflowers bloomed in little pockets where the sun reached through the trees. I followed that stream for maybe 2 hours, trying to stay close but also watching my footing in the grass. It was rough going. The trail would vanish now and then, and I'd have to backtrack or push through brush. My shoes were soaked through from the dew and from slipping once or twice trying to cross shallow parts. Eventually, I came to a gentle bend where the stream widened into a slow, glassy stretch maybe 30 feet across. The far side was shaded by a cluster of spruce, and the water looked almost black under their shadow. The grass around the bank grew higher, waist-deep in some places. The sun hit this part just right. It looked like a postcard, and I was overheating. I hadn't seen a soul all day. I passed no footprints, no wrappers, no sounds of humans. There was something freeing in that. I stood at the edge of the water and thought about how damn good it would feel to cool down. I didn't bring a towel or swim trunks, but it didn't matter. I stripped down completely, left my pack and clothes in a pile on the bank, and waded in. The shock of cold was almost painful at first. My legs went numb halfway to my knees. By the time I was waist deep, my breath came in short gasps. Still, I kept going, ducking under for a second, feeling the chill clamp around my skull. It was like hitting reset. My skin prickled all over, but I felt alive in a way you only feel in the woods, far from people, completely on your own. After a minute or two, the cold became tolerable. I just stood there, chest deep, letting the water do its work. The sun was hot on my face. The stream ran silent except for the occasional bird call or splash of a fish. It was perfect. Then I got curious. The stream bent out of view maybe 50 feet ahead, disappearing around a slight curve where the spruce trees leaned close over the bank. Something about it called to me. I figured I'd wait up just far enough to see around the corner. No reason not to. The water stayed about chest deep as I moved slowly forward, careful not to splash. Each step sank into smooth stones or soft silt. I was completely silent, just a ripple here and there. My ears picked up only the soft sound of water and a couple of bugs. It felt like being invisible. I got close to the bend, maybe 15 feet from the curve, and slowed. Something made me move slower, quieter, like instinct. I turned my head and peered around the corner. That's when I saw it. A bull moose, massive, standing halfway in the water, just upstream, less than 50 feet from me. His legs were half submerged, and his antlers looked like twisted driftwood, thick and heavy, stretching wider than his body. He stood perfectly still, nose down at the water's surface, drinking slowly. He hadn't seen or heard me. I froze, every muscle locked up. My heart kicked hard in my chest. My mouth went dry. For a moment, I couldn't even think. I'd heard how dangerous moose were. People think of bears and wolves, but moose? They're territorial. They'll charge without warning. And this one, judging by its antlers, was in full rut season size. And I was alone, naked, in the water. I didn't know what to do. Couldn't scream, couldn't run. I started turning slowly, carefully, trying not to make waves. One step, then another. My foot slid on a rock and I caught myself. A ripple spun out across the surface. I looked over my shoulder. He didn't react. I kept moving a little faster but still trying to keep quiet. My body wanted to sprint, but I knew splashing would give me away. I whispered to myself, though I didn't mean to. I think I said, "I don't want to die." Every time I exhaled, over and over, my chest was tight. I could barely breathe. I got back to the wide part of the stream without looking back. My feet touched the sloping gravel near the bank. I scrambled up, slipped once, scraped my shin, didn't care. I grabbed my clothes in one quick scoop. I didn't stop. I ran. Not a jog. A full sprint through the grass, through the trees. Branches scratched my legs and arms. Rocks jabbed my feet. I didn't care. I just ran. After what felt like a mile, I finally stopped. My lungs burned. I bent over, hands on knees, and tried to breathe. The forest felt close around me. I looked down and realized I was still naked, still clutching my clothes in a bunch. I sat on a log and pulled on my underwear and shoes. My hands shook. I didn't stop moving long. I kept going, hiking fast, barely watching the trail. Every sound made me jump. A snapping branch, a bird, even the wind. I didn't relax until I saw the glint of my car through the trees, back on that old forest road. I climbed in, slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there, still half-dressed, shaking. I stayed like that for maybe 20 minutes. My hands were red and scraped. My arms had welts from where grass and sticks had whipped me. My knee was bleeding, but none of that mattered. I was alive. I started the engine and drove the dirt road slow, careful not to skid on the gravel. My mind was blank. No music, no thoughts, just the road and the hum of tires. That night, back at the little apartment the company gave me, I took a long shower. The hot water stung every scratch. I sat on the floor of the tub when it got too much. Then I just laid in bed for hours, staring at the ceiling. I didn't sleep much. The next morning, I told myself I was fine. I tried to go about my day like nothing happened. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that moose. Those antlers. The way he stood still as stone. The way I could have died and no one would have known for weeks. I didn't hike alone for the rest of that year. I stuck to trails with signs. Trails with other people. I even bought a bear bell and a canister of pepper spray, though I knew neither would do much against something like a moose if it really wanted to charge. I also never again went into the woods without a set of emergency clothes sealed in a dry bag. What stuck with me wasn't just the fear. It was how small I felt, how powerless. In that moment, naked in cold water, yards from something that could kill me without thinking, I realized just how thin the line is between life and death when you're out there on your own. Years later, I look back on that day and shake my head. It seems ridiculous now, but I know how real it was. I know the feeling of that cold water, the thud of my heart, the scratch of twigs against bare skin. And I know that respect for the wilderness, true, gut-deep respect, only comes once you've felt that kind of fear. I still hike, still love the woods, but I don't make the same mistakes. I tell people where I'm going. I carry more than just a granola bar and water. And if I ever get too hot again, I make damn sure I know what's around the next bend before I step in the water. Because sometimes nature doesn't warn you. It just waits. I had planned this trip for weeks. A week away from the city noise, from the crowded subway cars and the dull office walls. The mountains around Cascade Ridge, Oregon, promised quiet, fresh air, and miles of trails winding through thick pine forests and rocky outcrops. I was 28, healthy, and experienced enough with hiking to be confident. But this trip turned out to be the most frightening experience I ever faced. Not because of wild animals or weather, but because of a man I never wanted to meet on a trail. I arrived late afternoon on a clear day in October. The fall air was crisp, the forest alive with the soft rustle of dry leaves underfoot and the distant call of birds settling in for the night. I started on the North Ridge Trail, a popular but rugged path that climbed steadily into a dense forest. The trail was narrow, flanked by thick bushes and tall pines, with patches of rocky ground. From the first steps, I felt good. My pack was well balanced, my boots sturdy and broken in. The silence was deep but comforting, broken only by my breath and the crunch of my boots on the dirt and leaves. As I climbed higher, the sun slipped behind the mountains, painting the sky with streaks of orange and red. After about 3 hours, I stopped at a small clearing. The view was incredible, a patchwork of green and gold forest stretching into the distance, with rivers gleaming like silver ribbons. I took out my water bottle and ate a small snack. The peace here was something I hadn't felt in months. Then, as I was packing up, I saw him. He came out of the trees on the other side of the clearing, limping slightly. He was a short man, unkempt, with wild hair and stained clothes. His face looked tired, and there was a roughness about him that made me uneasy. He moved oddly, almost like he wasn't used to walking long distances. I froze. Something about him triggered a memory I'd almost forgotten. A name, Tom Hendricks. I remembered the local news stories from the town near the trailhead. Tom was known around those parts. They called him the village idiot, a man who had a history of trouble, small crimes, fights, and mugging hikers. He had been caught multiple times, but always got off with light penalties. He was violent, dangerous, and unpredictable. Worse, rumors said he had threatened to kill people who crossed his path. I didn't want trouble. I turned my back and tried to move quietly down the trail, hoping to avoid him. But as I stepped into the trees, I heard footsteps behind me, quick and uneven. Panic rose in my chest. I broke into a fast walk, then a run. My heart hammered so loudly I thought he might hear it. The trail twisted and turned, narrow and steep. I stumbled over roots and rocks, my breath coming in sharp gasps. Behind me, the footsteps grew louder, closer. I glanced back. He was gaining. The woods blurred as adrenaline surged. I pushed harder, my legs burning, my lungs screaming. I didn't know how far I had run when I reached a fork in the trail. One path led uphill to a rocky ridge. The other descended into a dark, tangled thicket. Instinct told me to climb. The ridge gave me better visibility, a chance to spot him from a distance. I scrambled up the rocks, hands gripping cold stone. My boots slipped once or twice, but I kept going, reaching the top just as the last light faded. From there, I could see the clearing below, but there was no sign of him. I crouched, trying to control my shaking hands. My phone was dead, no signal for miles, and my map was in the pack, buried beneath my jacket. I was alone, with no way to call for help. Minutes passed. Then I heard it. A low shout, rough and angry, coming from the trees below. He was looking for me. I stayed as still as possible, listening. My mind raced. What if he had a weapon? The stories said he sometimes carried knives, even guns. What if he was waiting for me to come down so he could attack? The night thickened. The temperature dropped quickly, and I was still in a thin jacket. I tried to stay calm, wrapping my arms around myself, breath puffing out in white clouds. I thought about the stories of hikers attacked by locals or drifters who lived in the forest. The police didn't patrol these trails much. Local rangers said it was too dangerous to chase Tom. He was slippery, quick to violence, and no one trusted him. I realized then how little help I had. The nearest village was miles away, and even there the police were slow to act. I was truly on my own. The night stretched on. I watched the shadows move below the ridge, heard the crunch of leaves and branches as he searched for me. Every sound made my blood run cold. At one point, I spotted a flashlight beam cutting through the trees, but it wasn't mine. I knew I couldn't stay on that ridge forever. I had to move, had to find a way down and out before he circled around and trapped me. I waited until the moon was high, the forest bathed in silvery light. Slowly, I started down the ridge, sticking to the shadows, moving as quietly as I could. My heart was in my throat with every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves. Halfway down, I slipped and fell hard against a rock. Pain shot through my side, but I bit down on it and got up. I couldn't stop now. Suddenly, I heard a voice. Not talking, just a deep, angry growl. I didn't look back. I ran blindly through the underbrush, branches whipping my face and arms. Then I tripped again, falling flat in a patch of mud and leaves. He was right behind me. I could hear his heavy breathing. I scrambled to my feet, knowing I couldn't outrun him much longer. I looked around desperately for something to defend myself with. My eyes landed on a thick branch lying nearby. I grabbed it, heart pounding, and turned to face him. He was only feet away now, eyes wild, face twisted with rage. He lunged. I swung the branch hard, catching him in the shoulder. He grunted, staggering back, but he didn't stop. I hit him again and again, adrenaline giving me strength I didn't know I had. Then I heard something, a car engine roaring in the distance. It was faint at first, then louder. He froze. I did too. The headlights pierced the forest darkness, a vehicle coming fast down the trail. The sound gave me hope. The car stopped a few yards away. A man jumped out, flashlight in hand. It was a park ranger. I dropped the branch, chest heaving. The ranger quickly took in the scene. The man holding the branch, the angry figure with a bleeding shoulder, the fear in my eyes. He called for backup on his radio. Tom Hendricks snarled but backed away into the woods, disappearing into the night. I sat down on a fallen log, trembling but safe. The ranger stayed with me, offering water and a blanket. Backup arrived, and Tom was caught a few hours later. This time, the police didn't take any chances. The next day, as I left the forest behind, I realized how close I had come to something terrible. I had trusted the quiet of the woods and my own strength, but sometimes danger hides in the shadows, not from animals or storms, but from people who are lost and violent. The police may have been slow, and Tom may have been called a village idiot, but he was dangerous, more than I expected. And that day, I learned that sometimes being alone in the wild means facing not just nature, but the worst of human nature too. It was the summer of 2012 when I first started spending most of my weekends up in the hills near Larrabee State Park in northern Washington. I was 23 then, still in college, and a group of us had started getting really into bouldering. Not the gym kind, but actual rock, Outdoors, full-day climbs with calloused fingers, bug bites, and chalk dust caked into every crease of your clothes. There were 5 of us who went regularly: me, my roommate Ben, our mutual friend Jess, and a couple of Ben's friends from a photography class, Logan and Mike. We discovered this outcrop deep in the woods just outside the official park trails. It wasn't on any public maps, but some local climbers had left chalk marks and crash pads tucked under overhangs, so we knew it wasn't exactly untouched. Still, it was far enough off the path that we always had it to ourselves. To save time and gas money, we'd camp out there, hike in Friday night or early Saturday, climb all day, and then either crash under the stars or inside small 2-person tents we pitched in a clearing a short walk from the rocks. By the 4th or 5th trip that summer, we had it down to a routine. One of us would bring a portable grill and a little cooler with some cheap meat and buns. Someone always remembered firewood. We'd be sore and dirty, but the air was clean and cool in the evenings, and we were young and full of energy. I think back on those nights often, mostly with good feelings. But one night changed everything. It started the previous summer, actually. That was the first time something weird happened. We were camped out like usual, and Jess had left her rucksack and gear outside her tent when we went to bed. Nothing unusual. We all did that sometimes. I even left my climbing shoes and chalk bag outside once and had to shake a spider out of one the next morning. But this time, the next morning, Jess woke up and half her stuff was gone. Not just tossed around, gone. Her climbing boots, most of her spare clothes, and her chalk powder. Not even the bag, just the powder itself. We searched around the tents, around the boulders, up in the brush, thinking maybe she just left it somewhere and forgot. She swore she put it next to her tent. We all kind of believed her because it wasn't like her to be careless, but no one wanted to believe someone had come around and taken it either. That felt too weird. We ended up convincing ourselves that maybe some animal got curious. Maybe the smell of the chalk or sweat had drawn a raccoon or something. I know that doesn't make any sense, but we were tired and didn't want to think too hard about it. It was easier to laugh it off and drive back home talking about how much that raccoon must be into climbing. Jess replaced her gear. We forgot about it eventually, or maybe we just ignored it. Either way, we went back the next year, same spot, same setup. It was the 3rd trip of the season, early June. The weather was perfect. Not too hot, no rain, barely any bugs. That day we climbed for nearly 10 hours. I remember my arms feeling like rubber by the time we stopped. My fingers were raw and caked with dried chalk and dust. We made dinner near the fire pit, hot dogs and beans from a can, the usual. We sat around the fire for a while, just laughing and watching the flames. Logan had brought one of those little Bluetooth speakers and was playing some quiet instrumental stuff in the background. The woods were pitch dark beyond the glow of the fire, and we were all sitting in that comfortable silence you only get after a long day of using your body. At some point, I got up to go take a piss. I didn't go far, maybe 30 feet off into the woods, just far enough that I wouldn't be in earshot or view of the others. The trees thinned out a bit there, and I could still hear the faint music and see the flickering glow of the fire through the trunks. I was half asleep on my feet and just going through the motions when something caught my eye. At first, I thought it was a weird rock or maybe a fallen tree covered in moss. But it was moving, slowly, breathing. It took a few seconds for my eyes to really focus, and then I saw what it was. A man, lying flat on his stomach, halfway behind a fallen log, covered head to toe in a ghillie suit. You know, those camouflage things snipers wear with fake leaves and shredded fabric. He was facing the direction of our camp, directly watching us, watching me. I just stood there, frozen. My mouth went dry. My brain started spinning, trying to figure out if this was some insane misunderstanding or if I was actually seeing what I thought I was seeing. He didn't move at first, just laid there, staring. Then, when he realized I'd seen him, he bolted. Fast. No sound, just movement. Up on his feet and gone into the darkness, like he'd rehearsed it. I stood there for probably another full minute before I moved. Then I walked, didn't run, back to camp. My legs were trembling so hard I almost stumbled. The fire looked too bright, the others too relaxed. They didn't know anything was wrong. I didn't tell them, not that night. I didn't want to freak them out. We were in the middle of nowhere and it was pitch black. We had no cell service, and the car was a 40-minute hike down steep switchbacks. What could we even do? Go stumbling through the woods in the dark, trying to chase a guy in camo? That would have been worse. So I sat back down, pretended nothing happened. Didn't sleep that night, just laid in my tent listening to every twig snap, every rustle of leaves. Every now and then, I would imagine I heard someone creeping around, but it could have just been the wind. The next morning, I told Ben quietly while the others were packing up. His face went pale. He said maybe it was some hunter who wandered off the trail. We both knew that didn't make sense. No hunter lies on his stomach 30 feet from a fire pit watching campers for who knows how long. And no hunter bolts the second he's seen like he's guilty. We checked the area where I saw him. Nothing. No boot prints. No gear. No signs of anything. Whoever he was, he knew how to hide himself. We left right after. Didn't even eat breakfast. Packed everything fast and got out. That was the last time we went to that spot. Jess and Logan wanted to go back later that summer, but I always had some excuse. Eventually, we just stopped talking about it. Ben and I moved apartments that fall. Life changed, but that moment stuck with me. I started locking all my windows, even in broad daylight. I stopped hiking alone. I didn't camp again for over 2 years. The more I thought about it, the more things started connecting. Jess's missing gear, the boots, the chalk, the clothes. If someone had been watching us even back then, they could have taken it. Maybe they wanted souvenirs. Maybe they wanted to see if they could get away with it. Or maybe they were practicing. I don't know what that guy wanted. Maybe he was just watching. Maybe he'd been watching us for a long time. Maybe he liked getting close to people who didn't know he was there. And maybe the only reason something worse didn't happen that night is because I saw him. I still don't have answers. I never went to the cops. What could I have said? I saw a guy in the woods? But sometimes I wake up at night thinking about it. Not the guy himself, but the idea of it. That for hours we were sitting there, talking, eating, laughing, not knowing someone was just lying in the dark watching us. So close I could have hit him with a rock. People ask me why I don't climb anymore, why I quit camping even though I used to love it. I tell them I got busy. Life got in the way, but that's not true. The truth is, I've never gone back to Larrabee Woods, and I never will. I had heard about the place from my friends for years, an old mansion buried deep in the hills near a small town called Mill Creek, somewhere out in Northern California. They'd been there multiple times, each visit sounding stranger than the last. The house was massive, a labyrinth with odd twists, staircases that spiraled like corkscrews, and rooms that seemed to defy logic. They told me it was the perfect place for someone like me, someone who liked exploring abandoned places and who was working on a novel. It sounded like a goldmine for ideas. It was early summer 2017 when I finally decided to go. I was 26 then, just out of college, working odd jobs, and trying to write my first serious piece of fiction. I figured I'd get some good material from the mansion. I packed my backpack with essentials: water, snacks, a flashlight with extra batteries, a good camera, a notebook, and a pen. My phone had little signal out there, but I made sure it was charged. I left around 10 a.m. on a clear day and drove my old Honda Civic down winding rural roads, following GPS coordinates my friend had given me. I avoided the usual hiking trail that people used to reach the nearby campgrounds. Instead, I took a less-known dirt road that ran parallel but was quieter, less frequented. The air was cool but fresh, filled with the scent of pine and wildflowers. After about an hour of driving, the road ended near a small creek, and I parked the car. From there, it was a short hike through thick underbrush, uneven dirt paths, and clusters of tall fir trees. The ground was soft with fallen needles, muffling my footsteps. Occasionally, I heard the distant chirp of birds or the rustle of squirrels darting through the branches. The mansion was just as my friends described. From the outside, it looked like something out of a Gothic novel. It was a sprawling, 4-story stone building with large, shuttered windows and a steep slate roof. Ivy climbed up the walls, and the paint on the wooden trim was peeling. The driveway, which I took a photo of, was cracked and overgrown with weeds, but wide enough to have once held a grand carriage or multiple cars. There were no signs of recent human activity, but the place felt strangely alive, like it was waiting. I took a deep breath and pushed open the heavy front door. It groaned on rusty hinges, the smell of dust, mold, and old wood hitting me immediately. The interior was like a maze. Every staircase was a spiral, twisting up and down in confusing patterns. The floors creaked under my weight. The wallpaper was faded and peeling, showing patches of bare plaster. The air was cooler inside, stagnant, and thick with the smell of decay. I walked through long hallways that bent unexpectedly. Sometimes I would turn a corner and realize I was back where I'd started, like the place was designed to confuse visitors. There were dozens of rooms, bedrooms, studies, sitting rooms, all filled with remnants of a hurried departure. Furniture was overturned, picture frames shattered, papers scattered across the floor. It didn't look like teenagers had trashed the place, but more like a violent struggle had happened here at some point. The master bedroom was the strangest and most impressive room. It was at the end of a narrow spiral staircase that branched off the entryway to the left. The room was enormous, probably 30 by 40 feet. A giant, ornate bed frame without a mattress sat in the middle. To one side was a walk-in closet with broken shelves. To the other, a massive master bathroom with cracked tiles and a bathtub full of leaves. A large wooden deck extended from the bedroom's far wall, but the glass doors were shattered and the deck was overrun with vines. In the center of the bedroom, another spiral staircase wound up to a small, isolated study above. The room was dark, with only the weak sunlight filtering through grimy windows. I poked my head out against the glass and looked at the overgrown grounds below. From that height, I could see the tops of the surrounding trees and a narrow path leading away from the house into the forest. Unbeknownst to me at the time, one of the neighbors had spotted me through a window and called the local sheriff. I had no idea this was happening while I was still inside. I spent nearly an hour exploring every corner of the mansion, taking notes and photos where I could. But as the light started to fade, the place grew darker and more oppressive. The lower floors, especially the basement, were pitch black and smelled of damp earth. At one point, I turned a corner on a spiral staircase and found myself in a narrow corridor with no windows or exits, just endless walls closing in. The darkness pressed on me, and the silence was almost suffocating. I decided it was time to leave. I made my way back to the main entryway, but when I stepped outside, I saw the flashing lights of police cars parked on the driveway. 3 officers stood there, their faces set and serious. I froze, unsure what to do. For a moment, I considered sneaking away, but the feeling of unease stopped me. Something about the way the house looked at me, even from outside, made me want to be honest. I stepped forward and called out to them. They approached cautiously and asked for my ID. They searched my backpack and found my writing materials and camera, but also a small pipe and grinder I used for smoking. The officers were firm but not hostile. They told me not to come back to the property. One of the deputies asked me why I had gone there alone. I told him I was working on a story and wanted to get inspiration from the place. He shook his head, half amused, and said he didn't know if I had balls the size of grapefruits or if I was just stupid. He admitted he'd never go near that house unless it was part of an official investigation. I left the mansion that evening, the sun setting behind the trees. The place looked even more menacing in the fading light, like a giant beast waiting to swallow anyone foolish enough to stay too long. Driving away, I felt a strange mixture of relief and regret. I didn't get the full story from the mansion's secrets, but what I saw was enough to fill pages and pages of notes. Since then, I've tried to find those pictures I took inside, but after several computers and lost hard drives, they're gone. Maybe someday I'll stumble upon an old backup and get a chance to revisit the strange angles and eerie hallways captured in those photos. For now, the mansion remains a puzzle in my mind. An enormous, confusing place full of silence, shadows, and mystery, and a reminder that some places are better left alone. It was the summer of 2012, and I was 22 years old, working late nights at a small hardware store in the outskirts of a little town called Millbridge. Millbridge wasn't much, just a handful of houses spread along a few country roads, with the occasional farm here and there. It was the kind of town where everybody knew everyone else, or at least thought they did. The streets were quiet after dark, and the only noises were usually crickets or the distant hum of a tractor from some farm. My girlfriend at the time, Laura, was the only person I really felt comfortable with. We just started dating a few months earlier, and one thing we loved to do was take long walks late at night after my shift ended. I usually got off work at 11 p.m., and by the time I met her, the town was already pretty much asleep. But that made the quiet feel special, like we were the only two people awake in the world. We'd walk for hours sometimes, just wandering wherever our feet took us. We had no real plan. Some nights we went through the cemetery at the edge of town. It wasn't the kind of cemetery that felt creepy or haunted. It was small, well-kept, with old gravestones leaning this way and that from age. Laura always found the names and dates interesting, trying to imagine the lives behind them. Other nights we wandered down the little dirt roads that cut through fields and pastures, under big oak trees whose branches seemed to stretch forever. Sometimes, if the sky was clear, we'd stop in a field where the stars felt so close it was almost like you could reach up and touch them. That field was our favorite place. It was wide and open, far enough from the streetlights so the darkness wasn't blinding but gentle, soft. We'd lie back on the dry grass, look up at the sky, and just breathe. The night air smelled faintly of hay and earth. The silence was almost loud in the best way, and on those nights when the stars were bright, it felt like something sacred. One night in late August, Laura and I decided to go to the field to watch a small meteor shower. The sky was clear, and the air was warm but not hot, with a soft breeze that ruffled the grass. We arrived just after 11:30 p.m., leaving behind the dull glow of the streetlights and the faint hum of the town. The field stretched wide, with the tree line marking its far edge. The trees stood tall and dark against the sky, thick with leaves that whispered softly in the breeze. We spread out an old blanket Laura had brought and settled down to watch the show. At first, the meteors came slowly, bright streaks cutting across the black sky one at a time. Every now and then, a shooting star would flash, making us point and smile quietly. The stars themselves looked sharper than I'd ever seen. Countless dots of light, scattered like glitter across velvet. But as the meteor shower picked up, something else started to happen. From the tree line at the edge of the field, we heard noises. At first, it was soft, rustling and twigs snapping. Then the sounds grew louder and more disturbing. Low grunting noises, heavy thuds, the rustle of leaves, and the sharp crack of branches breaking. The noises didn't come from one spot, but seemed to move along the edge of the trees, shifting back and forth. It was as if something large was moving quickly through the underbrush, but it wasn't clear what. My heart started to beat faster. The peaceful night suddenly felt tense, like the air itself was holding its breath. Laura sat up, eyes wide, her hand gripping my arm. Neither of us said anything, but I could tell she was scared too. We were stuck out there, the wide open field offering no real shelter, with the dark, thick woods pressing just beyond. Then, out of the shadows came a figure. Not a person, but a large buck, a male deer with a rack of antlers that looked sharp and wide, almost monstrous in the dim light. His eyes caught the little light left from the stars, shining bright and fixed on us. He stopped about 20 feet away and stared. The silence between us stretched tight like a wire. I didn't breathe, couldn't move. The buck's muscles twitched under its coarse brown fur. His nostrils flared, and I could see the tension in his body like he was ready to charge. We stayed frozen like that for what felt like an eternity. The only sounds the distant crickets and the occasional grunt from the woods behind him. Then, just as suddenly as he had come, the buck turned and disappeared quietly into the tree line. The noises in the woods stopped after a few minutes, leaving the field feeling impossibly still. For a long time after that, Laura and I just sat in silence, too shaken to speak or move. We eventually got up and walked slowly back home, eyes constantly scanning the dark woods we'd just left. We didn't go back to the field for several days. When we finally did, the quietness felt different, too empty. The memory of the buck's intense gaze stuck with me for weeks. It wasn't just an animal wandering through. Something about that night, the way the buck moved and the noises from the woods, felt like a warning. Something we weren't supposed to be there. I had always liked camping, but I wasn't much of a hiker. I preferred the car camping style, drive deep into the wilderness, set up camp right by the car, and keep most of my gear in reach. It was easier, safer, and the kind of trip where you could relax without hauling heavy packs or stressing about miles and elevation. That's how we ended up on a weekend trip in the fall of 2019, way out in the middle of nowhere on public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. It was south of Gunnison, Colorado, somewhere I'd been before but never this far in. The group was close friends from college, 8 of us, 4 guys and 4 girls, all between 27 and 30 years old. We'd planned this trip for weeks. 3 cars packed tight with gear, food, and drinks, and an eagerness for some peaceful time in the wilderness. We had chosen a spot along a Forest Service road that led deep into BLM land, where dispersed camping was allowed. The road was rough but passable, and we drove for over an hour and a half before we finally saw the perfect clearing, a flat spot by some scrub pines with a small meadow beyond. We stopped there, happy to be far from the noise of highways or other people. The night started like any other camping trip. We built a fire, cooked a simple dinner, hot dogs, baked beans, some chips, and cracked open a few beers. The sun was setting, casting long orange and pink shadows over the hills. The air smelled like pine needles and dry earth, cold but not freezing. We had music playing softly from a Bluetooth speaker near the fire, but mostly we just talked and laughed. As darkness fell, we began cleaning up. The guys took down the grill and stacked the charcoal, while the girls packed up the cooler and tidied the trash. The fire was dying down, and we all agreed to get ready for bed soon. We kept the fire just enough to keep warm. Our cars were parked about 30 yards from the fire. We hadn't pulled them right up to the circle because we wanted to avoid damaging the ground too much. Each car had its own tent nearby, some just a few steps away. The setup was easy and comfortable. That's when we decided to take a quick break, go check on the cars, make sure everything was locked, and grab some extra blankets. It was getting colder than expected. No one expected what we found. The front right tire on each of the 3 cars was slashed. Deep gashes cut into the sidewalls, clean and deliberate. It looked like someone had used a box cutter or a similar blade, the kind you might use to open boxes or packages. The cuts were all in the same spot, precise and long enough to ruin the tires. There was no way this had happened by accident or from something on the road. We all stood there, staring at the tires in disbelief. Nobody said anything at first. The silence was thick and heavy. Then, a nervous laugh broke out from one of the guys, Jason. He suggested it was some kind of prank, but no one really laughed. We all knew something was off. The first thing I thought was, how could someone have done this without us noticing? We were all outside the whole time, the fire crackling, the wind blowing through the trees. Our ears were tuned to every sound. The crack of twigs, the call of a distant bird, the whistle of the wind through the pines. A soft hiss would have been hard to hear, sure, but someone sneaking up close enough to slash all 3 tires, one after the other, without being spotted? It was impossible. Then the panic set in. We looked around, scanning the darkness beyond the firelight. The forest seemed quiet, too quiet. The stars overhead were bright, clear in the cold night air. From our spot, we could hear cars from miles away on the highway, their headlights' faint beams flashing through the trees. If someone had been driving up the road recently, we would have heard the engines. If someone was watching us from the woods, they would have been close. The whole situation felt like a trap. We were isolated, no cell service, miles from the nearest ranger station or town. We had no way to call for help unless we drove back out. One of the guys, Nick, pulled out a small pistol he'd brought for protection. We all breathed a little easier knowing he had it with him, but the reality was clear. If someone was out there, they could come back. We moved fast. Everyone grabbed the spare tires we had packed. Some of us had been extra careful and started swapping them on. The night was cold, the shadows long and deep. The tires were heavy and awkward, but adrenaline kept us moving. The tension was thick. Nobody spoke much. Every rustle in the trees made us jump. Every distant animal sound felt like a warning. Once all 3 cars had their spares on, we decided we couldn't stay. We packed up what we could quickly, piling into the cars. Nick stayed alert with the gun, watching the woods as we got ready to leave. We drove out in a line, headlights cutting through the darkness, engines loud in the still night. Every mile felt like an escape from an unseen threat. When we finally hit the highway and got cell reception, we called the local sheriff and the forest rangers, gave them our coordinates and the road we'd taken. The cops told us there wasn't much they could do, but advised us to be careful out there. They confirmed that the road was public land and that dispersed camping was legal. We never found out who did it or why. Nobody reported anything suspicious in the area before or after. Since that night, I've had trouble sleeping sometimes. The feeling that someone was watching, waiting, ready to do harm, it sticks with me. I keep going over the events in my head, trying to understand how we missed the signs, how we didn't hear or see whoever did it. Sometimes I think about the way those tires were slashed, methodical, clean, the same spot on each one. It felt personal, like a warning or a message, not a random act, not a prank. The scar from that trip didn't fade with time. I still avoid camping alone or anywhere that feels too remote. I double-check my tires, lock my car doors, and carry a knife now just in case. Because out there, in the quiet woods where you expect only nature, there can be something else, something watching. And sometimes it chooses you. It was the summer of 2012 when me and 3 friends decided to do something a little different. We were all 16, just teenagers looking for a little adventure. There was this small mountain just outside our town, a place people usually only visited during the day. We had heard about a meteor shower that was supposed to be visible that night, and someone said the view from the top was perfect. The sky would be darker, away from the town's lights, so it seemed like a good idea to hike up at night. My name is Jake, and my friends were Matt, Emma, and Liam. We had been friends since middle school and often did stuff like this on weekends. Nothing too crazy, just hanging out, sometimes camping, sometimes hiking, but always during daylight hours. This night was different because we wanted to see the meteor shower live and away from the city lights. None of us had hiked at night before, but we figured it would be fine as long as we stuck together and took flashlights. We planned everything the day before. I packed some water bottles, snacks, and extra batteries for the flashlights. Emma, the only girl in our group, brought a light jacket because it got colder at higher elevations after dark. Matt and Liam were the most excited about the whole idea. They were always looking for something to prove they weren't scared of anything. We left around 9 p.m. The sky was clear, the stars just beginning to pop out as the sun finished setting. We drove in Matt's old pickup to the trailhead parking lot. The lot was almost empty except for one other car near the edge. We parked, grabbed our stuff, and started the hike just as the temperature began to drop. The trail was narrow but well-marked. We had to switch on our flashlights, the beams cutting through the dark. The forest around us was quiet except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant calls of night animals. We were chatting quietly, laughing about dumb stuff, trying to keep our spirits high and not focus on the fact that it was pretty creepy walking through a forest at night. About halfway up, we stopped at a small clearing to catch our breath and take a break. The clearing overlooked part of the valley below, and we could see the faint glow of the town's lights. That's when we noticed something strange. Standing a little off to the side of the trail, maybe 20 yards away, was a man. He was wearing a dark business suit and a tie, which looked completely out of place in the middle of the woods. We froze for a moment, exchanging nervous looks. None of us said anything, but we all noticed the man wasn't just standing there randomly. He seemed to be watching us. The way he stood was too still, almost like he was waiting for something. It was unsettling because no one in their right mind would wear a suit to go hiking at night, especially not here. We decided to keep moving, quickening our pace. The trail was steep but manageable. We didn't want to be rude, but something about this guy was off. When we stopped again a little later to catch our breath, the man was still behind us. This time he was much closer, only about 10 feet away. He didn't walk past us. Instead, he stopped and quietly asked if we were going to the top for the meteor shower and if he could join us. Felt strange. A grown man in a suit, asking to hike with 4 teenagers, late at night. Something about the whole thing didn't sit right, but we didn't want to cause trouble. We hesitated but finally agreed, telling ourselves it was just a weird but harmless guy. As we continued up the trail, I noticed he was walking really close to Emma, almost too close, like he was intentionally trying to invade her space. His breath was so close to her that I could almost smell his cologne mixed with the scent of the forest. Emma looked uncomfortable but didn't say anything. Matt and Liam were a bit quieter than usual, probably sensing the same thing. The hike felt longer than usual. The man stayed close the entire time. When we finally reached the summit, the air was colder and thinner. We found a flat spot with some rocks and sat down to watch the sky. The meteor shower started to appear, little streaks of light shooting across the black canvas above us. It was beautiful, but Emma was visibly tense, and I could tell the man's presence was bothering her. He sat uncomfortably close to Emma, almost pressing against her side. She tried to move a little away, but he shifted closer again. It was obvious he was ignoring our personal space. My stomach churned, and I felt a knot of fear tightening in my chest. I made an excuse, something about needing to get back early, and signaled to the others. We all stood up and started back down the trail, moving fast. The descent was nerve-wracking. Every crack of a twig and rustle of leaves made me jump. The man followed us, still in his suit, still moving at a steady pace behind us. It felt like we were being hunted, even though nothing had actually happened yet. We dared not stop to look back. When we finally reached the parking lot, we sprinted to Matt's truck and jumped in. We locked the doors and started the engine. Just as we were about to drive off, Emma pointed out something that made my blood run cold. The man was running toward us, full sprint right down the trail, holding a large stick in his hand like a weapon. His eyes were wild, and his face was twisted in a way I will never forget. We didn't hesitate. Matt hit the gas hard, tires screeching on the gravel, and we peeled out of the lot as fast as we could. For the entire drive home, none of us spoke. The silence was thick and heavy. We all knew what could have happened if we had stayed. We tried to brush it off, telling ourselves the guy was probably on drugs or just crazy. But the unease stayed with us. 2 days later, our phones all buzzed at once. We had a group text from Liam. It was a link to a local news report. The headline chilled me to the bone. Man arrested for murder after strangling wife and killing another woman on local hiking trail. The article showed a grainy photo of the suspect. It was the same man we saw, the suit, the wild eyes, the same hiking trail we had been on. They said he had strangled his wife earlier that evening and then went out looking for another victim. The second woman was found dead along the trail we had just run down. We never told our parents. We never went back there. Every time I look at a starry night, I remember that night. The thrill, the fear, and the narrow escape. That mountain is still there, quiet and dark, but it will never feel safe again. My name is Marcus, and I've lived in the small town of Ridgewood all my life. It's the kind of place where everyone knows each other, and the woods that surround the town are thick and old, stretching for miles in every direction. I've always been drawn to those woods, often going for long hikes by myself, sometimes late enough to catch the sun rising through the trees. The woods feel alive in the early morning, soft light spilling through the branches, the smell of damp earth and pine filling the air, birds waking up and calling out to each other. It's peaceful, almost like the forest itself is breathing alongside me. This particular night was no different at first. It was late spring, May of 2017. I was 28 years old then, a bit restless, looking to clear my head after a tough week at work. I left my apartment around midnight, dressed in dark clothes with my backpack packed lightly. A flashlight, some water, a small knife, a first aid kit, and a half-eaten sandwich I'd grabbed on my way out. I told no one I was going. It wasn't unusual for me to hike alone late at night. The woods were my refuge. I entered the tree line near the old hiking trail, the one that runs behind the abandoned quarry on the north side of town. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, so I relied mostly on my flashlight as I walked. The air was cold and crisp for late spring, with a faint mist crawling just above the ground. The only sounds were the crunch of leaves beneath my boots, the distant hoot of an owl, and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through underbrush. I kept walking, deeper and deeper into the forest. The path was faint here, more like a deer trail than a proper hiking path, but I knew these woods well enough to trust my instincts. I had done this hike many times before, but never so late, never so quiet. I noticed how every sound seemed sharper in the dark. Twigs snapping, branches creaking, leaves rustling, but nothing seemed unusual, just the forest alive at night. After about 2 hours of walking, I realized I'd wandered farther than usual. The trees here grew taller and thicker, their branches weaving together like a roof, blocking out even the little moonlight there was. I considered turning back, but the thought of going back just yet didn't appeal to me. I wanted to see the sunrise, so I kept going. About a mile further, I stumbled across something so strange it stopped me cold. There, in a small clearing not far off the path, was what looked like a shanty town. Something I could not have imagined existing this close to town, hidden away in the woods. It was built from scrap metal, old wooden pallets, ripped bed sheets, and broken furniture scavenged from who knows where. There were roughly a dozen little hovels, arranged haphazardly in a circle. In the center was a fire pit, fashioned out of an old tire, blackened and bent, and inside the pit, a fire still burned low, flickering with weak orange flames. The air smelled faintly of smoke and something else. Damp fabric, maybe, or something metallic. What made it stranger was how quiet it was. There was no sound of people, no movement, nothing. It was as if the place had been abandoned in a hurry, but the fire was clearly still alive, recently tended to. I could see some belongings left behind. A few empty cans, some torn blankets, a battered backpack lying on its side, a pair of worn boots just outside one of the hovels. The whole scene was unsettling. I had never heard or seen anything about anyone living in those woods, especially not like this. A place like this could hold a dozen people, maybe more if they crowded inside, but the absence of anyone there was eerie. I crouched down to get a closer look at the fire pit. The fire was barely warm now, but it was definitely not cold, which meant whoever had built the fire had left recently, maybe only minutes or an hour ago. Around the edges of the clearing, I spotted small trails worn into the dirt, some leading deeper into the woods, others back towards town. I scanned the surroundings carefully, shining my flashlight over the shanties, their makeshift walls sagging in places, the bed sheets fluttering lightly in the night breeze. The place had a lived-in feel. Someone had spent time here, maybe even days or weeks, but for some reason they were gone now. I felt a chill running down my spine, but it wasn't the cold. It was the loneliness of the place. The fact that someone had made the effort to build this camp and keep a fire burning in the middle of the night, only to vanish without a trace. I knew from years of hiking these woods that you don't just disappear out here without leaving some sign, and there was none. No trash scattered wildly, no signs of a struggle, no footprints around the campfire that I could distinguish clearly in the faint light. The thought that someone had left this fire burning, unattended, made me uneasy. I couldn't imagine anyone just leaving a fire burning in the woods unless they intended to come back soon. Maybe they had to leave suddenly, or maybe something scared them off. I moved cautiously around the perimeter of the camp, trying to find clues. Near one of the shanties, I saw a small collection of canned food, some half-empty cans, a few empty jars, and a torn plastic bag full of what looked like old clothes. Everything was covered in a thin layer of dirt and pine needles, but it was all neatly stacked, not strewn about. Whoever lived here had been organized, careful. I shone my flashlight into one of the hovels and saw the inside was small but functional. A makeshift bed of old blankets and foam, a few rusted cooking pots hanging on nails, and scraps of paper pinned to the walls with names and dates, though I couldn't make out what was written. A sudden noise made me freeze, a branch snapping nearby. I spun around quickly, flashlight sweeping the dark woods beyond the clearing, but saw nothing. My heart jumped, but I told myself it was just a deer or a raccoon. Still, I felt watched. I stepped back to the fire pit, feeling a strong urge to put out the fire. Leaving a fire burning like this was dangerous. It could easily start a forest fire if the wind picked up. I grabbed a few handfuls of dirt and started to smother the flames, the fire sputtering and finally dying in a puff of smoke. As the last embers went out, I took a deep breath and looked back at the shanties one last time. I wanted to stay longer, try to figure out who had built this place and why, but the feeling of unease was growing. I didn't want to be out here alone with no one around to call for help if something went wrong. I turned and headed back the way I came, flashlight cutting through the dark woods. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone following me, but there was only the silence and shadows. When I finally reached the edge of the woods, just as the sky was starting to lighten with the first hints of dawn, I looked back once more. The shanty town was nowhere to be seen from the path. The thick trees hid it perfectly. I never told anyone about what I saw that night. I thought maybe I imagined it, or that someone was playing a prank, but the fire pit was real, and the smell of smoke still lingered on my clothes days later. I never went back, and I never saw anything like it again. But sometimes, when I'm walking those woods at night, I wonder who built that place, why they left so suddenly, and what would have happened if I had stayed a little longer. I was 21 years old when I did something dumb because I was broke and restless. It was 2009. I dropped out of community college that spring and had been sleeping on a friend's couch in Sacramento for a few months. He didn't ask me to leave, but I could tell he was getting tired of having me around. I had about $80 in my wallet, a half-full tank of gas in my 15-year-old Corolla, and no real plan. That's when I decided I'd take a short trip north to clear my head. I told myself I'd just sleep in my car a night or two and explore the hills around Mendocino County. It wasn't that far from where I was, and I figured I'd be able to find somewhere peaceful to crash for a couple nights, away from the city noise and my own thoughts. The second evening out there, I found this pull-off spot off a gravel forestry road about 30 minutes outside of Fort Bragg. It was dense redwood forest, towering trees with thick moss-covered trunks, and the air smelled like pine needles, bark, and dirt. That earthy smell you only get when you're deep in a forest. I'd hiked a few miles earlier that day, eaten a peanut butter sandwich for dinner, and decided I didn't want to sleep in my car again. My back was already sore from the night before, so I figured I'd sleep out under the stars. I didn't own a tent, but I had a sleeping bag, 2 old army blankets, and a canvas tarp I'd picked up for $5 at a flea market. I cleared a space just off the side of the pull-off, not too far into the woods, but far enough that the car wasn't right next to me. I laid down the tarp, spread one of the blankets across it, and unrolled my sleeping bag. I wrapped myself up and pulled the other blanket over everything. It was cool but not too cold, probably mid-50s, and there wasn't much wind. I had a flashlight, my phone, with barely any signal, and a folding knife. It wasn't much, but it felt like enough at the time. I remember lying there looking up through the branches. The trees stretched up so high it felt like being in a cathedral. There wasn't much moonlight, just a faint glow filtering through the redwoods. I heard a few night sounds, wind brushing through branches, the occasional snap of a twig, maybe a distant owl, but it was quiet enough to be peaceful. I drifted off without much trouble. I'm not sure what time I woke up. My phone was buried somewhere in the blankets, and I didn't bother digging it out. But I came to suddenly, like I'd heard something. I didn't know what it was. Maybe a shift in the breeze, maybe a faint sound I couldn't identify. The woods felt still, but something felt off. I didn't move right away, just lay there and listened. My heart was already beating a little faster than normal. After a few minutes, I reached for the flashlight I'd left next to me and turned it on. The beam wasn't very strong. It was a cheap one from a dollar store, but it lit up the immediate area around the blanket. That's when I saw them, lined around the edges of the blanket, facing outward like some kind of weird perimeter, were these spiders. Dozens of them, maybe more, each one about the size of my palm if you counted the legs. They were long-legged and shiny black. Their bodies were small and light, their legs thin and jointed like wire. They weren't moving, not much anyway, just standing there evenly spaced, every one of them facing away from me. They weren't crawling on me or on the blankets or anywhere near my body, just this precise ring around the outer edge of the tarp. I don't know how long I stared. I remember thinking maybe they were harvestmen, those spiders people call daddy long legs. But their legs were longer and they looked, I don't know, more alert, like they weren't just there by chance. My flashlight flicked across the line of them and most of them didn't move. A couple shifted slightly, raising a leg or turning slightly, but they didn't break the circle. They just stood there. Creeped me out, no doubt about that. I've never had a serious problem with spiders, but that many all at once, so perfectly still and organized, it messed with me. My first thought was that they were waiting. Maybe not for me specifically, but maybe they were hunting bugs and this was a tactic. I didn't know. I didn't want to get up. I didn't want to step out over them. I pulled the blanket tighter over myself and turned the flashlight off. My heart was still thumping, and I remember listening to the quiet for a long time. I told myself they weren't dangerous, that if they were going to crawl on me, they would have already. I tried to slow my breathing. I stayed curled up as still as I could, and at some point I fell back asleep. When I woke again, it was light. Full daylight with golden sunlight coming in at an angle through the redwoods. It had to be early morning. My back was sore, and my neck ached from the way I'd slept, but the first thing I did was sit up and look around. There was no sign of the spiders. Nothing. Not a single one. I checked the edges of the tarp, under the blankets, even around nearby logs and stones. The forest looked normal, peaceful again. It was like it had never happened. I packed up quickly, folded the tarp, stuffed the sleeping bag and blankets into the trunk of my car. I didn't eat breakfast. I just got in and started driving back south. I didn't stop until I was well out of the woods, close to the main road. That day and the days after, I thought a lot about it. I did some reading online once I had internet again. I never found anything that exactly matched what I saw. Some types of spiders are known to hunt in coordinated groups, but that's usually smaller species, and not in that kind of formation. Could have been a fluke. Maybe there was something about the scent of the tarp or the blankets. Maybe the warmth from my body attracted insects, and the spiders were drawn by that. But even with those possibilities, the way they stood in that circle, facing outward, evenly spaced, it still makes my skin crawl. Over time, I stopped talking about it. It sounds like the kind of thing someone makes up. And if I hadn't seen it myself, I might not believe it either. But I know what I saw. I've camped since then, but I've always had a tent. Always zipped up. Never slept on the open ground again, no matter how nice the weather is. That night in the redwoods taught me something simple but hard. Nature isn't there for us. It doesn't care what makes us comfortable. It doesn't move according to our stories. Sometimes it just does something that doesn't make sense, and you're left with the memory and no answers. I never went back to that pull-off. I couldn't even find it again if I tried. But I still remember it all. The scent of the bark, the chill in the air, the way my flashlight beam hit that ring of silent spiders. And I remember how small I felt, lying there in the dark, trying not to move, while the forest watched and didn't care. It was early January 2013, in the middle of a brutal Australian summer, and I was 26 years old when I joined a small hiking group heading out into the Great Dividing Range in New South Wales. Back then, I had just quit my job working long night shifts at a warehouse near Bathurst. I was burned out. I was tired of the city noise, tired of the lights, and I needed silence. I wanted to be surrounded by trees and nothing else. That was the plan. Just wilderness, hills, and stars. There were 4 of us in the group. No guide. No fancy gear, just people who had hiked before and wanted to go deep, away from the roads, away from signal, away from anything man-made. We didn't bring tents because summer nights in that part of Australia are usually dry, and carrying a tent felt unnecessary. What we did bring were sleeping bags, some cooking gear, water filters, lightweight food, and tarp-like tent flies in case it rained. We knew how to dig toilets, hang food bags, and check for funnel web spiders. We thought we knew what to expect. The first few days were perfect. We moved through eucalyptus forests that hummed with cicadas, climbed sun-baked ridgelines with sweeping views of green valleys, and camped under wide open skies. During the day, we wore long sleeves and hats to keep the sun off, and at night we slept on dry earth in our bags. watching satellites glide silently overhead. Kangaroos passed us by. Occasionally, we heard a distant rustle from wallabies or possums in the underbrush. Nothing alarming, just the normal background noise of the Australian bush. That one night, night 6, was the one that stuck with me, the one I still think about whenever I pack for a trip. The one that turned something peaceful into something I couldn't wait to escape. We'd been climbing most of the day, heading towards a lookout point someone had found on an old topographic map. It was hard going. The trail was faint, barely visible in spots, and sometimes it just disappeared beneath patches of thick bracken or tall grass. The heat was cruel. We stopped every hour just to cool down and drink water. I remember the air smelling like hot dust and eucalyptus oil. My shirt stuck to my back, and even though I'd been drinking steadily, my throat always felt dry. By mid-afternoon, clouds had started to gather. Big, lazy summer clouds. We weren't too worried though. It wasn't the kind of sky that screamed storm, more like a curtain pulled partway across the sun, offering us some shade and a break from the brutal heat. Still, we made camp a little earlier than usual, just in case. We stopped in a little clearing beside a shallow stream that ran over smooth stones. The trees opened just enough to let the sky through. There was a long, narrow log lying across the clearing, half-rotted and dotted with green moss. We threw our sleeping bags on the flattest part of the ground, unrolled them, and laid the flies nearby just in case we had to cover up. The water was clean and cold, and we filtered enough to cook and refill our bottles. That night, just before the sun disappeared behind the ridge, I noticed something odd. There were caterpillars everywhere. Not a few, hundreds. They were long and fuzzy, hairy things about as thick as a pencil and maybe as long as my index finger. I noticed them first on the log where I sat to take off my boots, then on the rocks around the stream. Then one brushed against my bare ankle. It made my skin crawl. I figured they were just part of the environment, and I shook it off. It's Australia. Everything has legs or fangs or wings. But when I looked around properly, I saw they weren't just part of the forest, they were everywhere. They moved slowly in thick little lines, like someone had poured a bag of living pipe cleaners over the bush. Some were crawling over each other. Some moved in circles. Others just inched along the bark and grass in quiet waves. We talked about moving camp, but the next suitable spot was too far, and the sun was going down fast. The clouds had thickened, not dark enough to rain, but enough to dim the landscape into early dusk. I didn't want to hike again in that light. We were tired, so we stayed. I zipped up my sleeping bag tight, pulled a bandana over my mouth, and shoved in earplugs. Not for sound, but for bugs. I left only a slit open to breathe and see the stars. I thought I could sleep like that. I really believed it. The ground was warm, and at first it seemed manageable. But as soon as the light was gone, they came. I didn't hear them. You never hear caterpillars. But I felt them. I woke to something tickling my cheek. I swiped at it, thinking it was a mosquito. Then again. Then I felt another on my neck. I sat up fast and rubbed my face. There were two. One stuck in my hair, another near the corner of my eye. My hands brushed off tiny hairs. I felt a sharp, stingy itch on my shoulder. Another was there, squashed now under my palm. I turned on my headlamp. The ground around me was moving. They were in my bag, not just outside, inside, between the folds, under the hood, across my feet. One had crawled inside my shirt. The others had the same problem. I saw bodies shifting in sleeping bags, people cursing silently under their breath. Red dots of headlamps flicked on and off. I got out of my bag and stood in bare feet, brushing myself off like I was on fire. It didn't help. The hairs from those things stayed stuck to my skin. I could feel them itching like invisible fiberglass. I moved to the log, but that was worse. It was coated with them. I walked to the edge of the stream, tried to cool off, scrub my arms. But even there, they were crawling across the stones, climbing through the ferns, dropping from the low branches. I crouched on a boulder in the middle of the water and stayed there, at least for a while. That night was long. No sleep, just half-waking nightmares. Every time I closed my eyes, I imagined them crawling up my neck, wriggling into my mouth. I started to feel them even when they weren't there. I slapped at imaginary things. I scratched myself raw. I wrapped my sleeping bag into a tight roll and leaned against a tree with my jacket over my legs. I must have drifted off for short spells, but it didn't feel like rest. It felt like shutting down. By first light, we were all up. No one said anything. We just packed. I remember brushing at my gear like a madman, turning over my boots to shake out anything hiding inside. I saw one half squashed against my sock, another tucked inside the hood of my jacket. I didn't even want breakfast. I just wanted to move, to be gone. The next 2 hours were hell. No trail, just crashing through bush, branches scraping our faces, caterpillars still clinging to gear. Every time we stopped, I found more of them. On my hat, on my pack straps. I couldn't stop scratching. One had left welts on my stomach. The hairs were like tiny stingers that broke off into your skin and stayed there. My arms looked like I'd rolled through thorns. By midday, we found a flat stretch of high ground far from trees and thick brush. No caterpillars, no logs, just wind and dust and silence. We dropped our bags and stood still. I remember standing there and just breathing, letting the sun bake the memory off me. I stripped off my shirt and let the air touch the red, swollen patches on my skin. We spent the next 2 nights in clearer places. Rock shelves, exposed ridges, no grass, no damp earth. I didn't care if the ground was hard. I'd sleep on stone. I didn't care if the wind kept me awake. At least it wasn't crawling. When we finally hiked out 5 days later, I threw my sleeping bag into a garbage skip in the back of a petrol station. I didn't want to bring it home. Even washed, I knew it'd never feel clean. I never wanted to unzip that bag and wonder if something still lived inside it. I've been hiking since. I've gone back to the ranges a few times, but I pack differently now. I always carry a full tent, even in summer. I seal everything. I check every spot before I lay down. And I never camp near rotting logs. Sometimes I still wake up feeling that same tickle on my cheek. Not a dream, just a memory that lives in my nerves now. A reminder of how quiet terror can be. Not loud, not violent, just something soft, fuzzy, and patient, and everywhere. I remember that trip more clearly than most others I've taken. It was late September of 2022, and I had planned a solo hiking and camping trip in a quiet area just off Coldwater Bay, near the northern edge of Lake Superior in Ontario. I wasn't familiar with the exact trail system, but I'd done enough research to know that it wasn't too trafficked and that it was technically part of Sleeping Giant Provincial Park. I had been looking for something remote and quiet, somewhere with views of the water and not too many other hikers around, somewhere I could be completely alone for a while. I had done solo trips before, so it wasn't new to me, but every first night still rattled me, no matter how many times I went. There's something about being alone in a tent that far from civilization. The silence is never really silent. It's all creaks and snaps, rustling leaves, shifting branches, animal footsteps you can't place. Your mind starts to fill in the blanks, and usually not in a helpful way. I was 34 that fall, between jobs and trying to clear my head. I just left a position that had eaten up 3 years of my life without giving much back, and I was taking a break before starting something new. A lot of people talked about finding themselves in nature. I wasn't really going for that. I just needed to be out there and away from people. I needed to feel small and disconnected and completely on my own. I parked at a small lot off the east side of the park and hiked in for about 5 hours the first day, starting in late morning. I was carrying everything I needed for 4 nights. My tent, sleeping bag, stove, food, bear spray, clothes, gear. The air was crisp but dry, just warm enough to be comfortable if I kept moving, and just cold enough to be miserable if I sat still too long. I had on a light thermal top, a jacket, hiking pants, a cap, and boots that were just broken in. The trail wasn't tough, mostly gentle ridges with the occasional steep climb. The fall colors were just past their peak. Mostly dry golds and dull oranges, with scattered patches of stubborn red still clinging to the trees. By late afternoon, I had reached the edge of the woods near a narrow slope that ran down to a pebble beach at the edge of the lake. The place felt quiet in a way that almost made my ears ring. There were no boats in sight, no people, no planes overhead, nothing. The water was dark blue, flat, and wide, stretching toward the horizon. I could just barely see a faint outline of one of the sleeping giants' ridges in the far distance to the west. I picked a small clearing just before the treeline and set up my tent facing the slope. From the front of the tent, I could look out and see the beach and the lake below, with a clear view of the water through a break in the trees. I boiled water, made a simple freeze-dried meal, and ate sitting on a flat rock with my boots off and my legs stretched. I remember watching the sun dip down into the water, the sky turning that deep navy blue before fading fully into darkness. As soon as the sun was gone, the temperature dropped like a stone. I got into the tent around 8 p.m. It was fully dark by then, and I had a small LED lantern hanging from the tent ceiling, giving off a soft orange glow inside. I read for a bit, wrote in a small notebook I kept with me on trips, and then lay down with my sleeping bag pulled tight around my shoulders. But I couldn't sleep. It wasn't the cold. It was just that I couldn't shut my brain off. It always took me at least a night to adjust to the sounds of the woods, and this night was worse than usual. I was hyper-aware of every tiny snap, every rustle in the leaves outside. I kept reminding myself that it was probably squirrels or rabbits or raccoons or wind, that's all. But every few minutes, something would make a louder sound, something sharp or heavy, and my heart would pound like I was in real danger. My mind kept going to the same place. What if it's not an animal? What if someone is out here? It was irrational. I knew it was irrational. There were no cars at the trailhead but mine, and no recent reports of hikers missing or harmed in the park. It was supposed to be safe, but that didn't stop my imagination. When you're alone in the dark in a place that remote, you can't help but let your thoughts go to the worst-case scenario. And mine always went straight to serial killers. Always had. I kept telling myself to calm down, to breathe, to let the forest noise fade into the background like white noise. But then I heard it. It was different from everything else. Not a crack or a rustle. It was a heavy step, then another. Not light like a squirrel or even a raccoon. These were weighty. Whatever it was had mass to it. Something big enough to snap dry twigs without trying. I went completely still. It was maybe 30 feet away. I could hear the steps. Slow, uneven, deliberate. Something was walking in the woods behind my tent, just beyond the treeline. Then I heard a deeper sound, like a low grunt, followed by another step. Then silence. For what felt like a full minute, there was nothing. I was holding my breath without realizing it. Every muscle in my body was tensed, like I was waiting to run, but there was nowhere to run. I was zipped inside a flimsy tent, lying flat with a knife that was too small to matter and a can of bear spray that I wasn't even sure I could grab fast enough. Then I heard another sound. This time not footsteps, but a crash. Rocks, a few of them tumbling. Then a loud thud, followed by a brief moment of silence, and then a burst of clattering as more rocks skidded down the slope outside. It was directly outside the tent. Whatever it was had fallen, and it had landed on the slope between the treeline and the beach. I was almost sure of it. My heart was beating so fast it made my vision blur. My ears were ringing. I thought for a second that I might be having a panic attack. I didn't move. I didn't even blink. The crash had been so loud, so sudden, that I hadn't processed what it could have been. Finally, after a long stretch of silence, I forced myself to reach for the flashlight beside my head. My hand was shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I flicked it on and the small tent lit up, casting strange shadows against the fabric. I stared at the zipper for a long time before I could convince myself to move. I slid the zipper open a few inches and pushed the flashlight out, angling the beam downward across the slope. I only got a quick glimpse, maybe a second or two, but it was enough. There was an elk, maybe 20 feet away, lying on its side on the beach at the bottom of the slope. It was huge. Its antlers had hit the stones awkwardly, and it was shifting its legs to try to stand back up. It looked confused, dazed, like it had stumbled straight down and hadn't expected to fall so hard. Then, slowly, it scrambled back up, struggled for a moment, and trotted awkwardly across the pebbles and out of view to the left, disappearing into the trees again. I just sat there. My breath finally came out in a long, shaky exhale, and I turned off the flashlight. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept thinking about how big it had been. I could still hear the crash echoing in my head. It must have stepped wrong on the ridge above my tent and tumbled straight down. I figured it had been foraging, maybe confused by the slope in the dark, and lost its footing. It hadn't been trying to come near me, probably hadn't even noticed my tent. I lay there with my eyes open until the sky started to turn gray. That morning, I stepped out of the tent and walked down to the beach, checking the stones where I'd seen it fall. Sure enough, there were deep scrapes where hooves had slid down, along with fresh prints in the damp pebbles below. A few branches had snapped at the treeline just above. It hadn't been in my head. The elk had definitely fallen through, and it must have come within 10 feet of where I was sleeping. Later that day, I moved my camp a bit farther inland, just enough to feel less exposed. I stayed out there for another 3 nights, and nothing else like that happened again. No big animals crashing through the woods. No strange footsteps. Just wind and waves and the usual forest sounds. I settled in after the second night, got comfortable, managed to sleep through most of it without trouble. But I never forgot that first night. Not because I was really in danger. I wasn't. But because it reminded me how fragile it all was. How fast a calm night could turn into something terrifying. And how, sometimes, what you think is the worst-case scenario is just a clumsy elk losing its footing in the dark. I think that's part of the reason I go out there in the first place. Not for peace, not to find anything, but to remind myself that there are still places where I'm not in control. Places that don't care if I'm scared. Places where the forest makes the rules, not me. And sometimes, those rules involve a half-ton animal tumbling through the night and landing 5 steps from your tent. Still, I kept hiking. Still do. But every time I unzipped the tent on a cold, dark night, I remember the sound of those footsteps. And I remember how close that elk really was. And how lucky I was that it was just an elk. It was the summer of 2018, sometime in late July. I was 35 years old then, and I had taken a full week off work for a canoe camping trip with my wife, Anna. We had been talking about it for months. No screens, no traffic, no other people, just the lake, the woods, and the 2 of us. We drove up from Ottawa early one Friday morning and parked at a small, gravel pull-off near the northern end of Lake Bertrand, a long, narrow lake tucked deep inside a lesser-known conservation area in eastern Ontario. Lake Bertrand stretched about 6 or 7 kilometers end to end, shaped like a long, winding river. The water was dark, but clean, surrounded by dense forests of pine, spruce, and birch, with a few rocky ridges lining the banks. The lake was only about 50 meters wide in most places, narrower in some. It twisted and turned with bends that felt like nature's hallways, the trees leaning over the edges in some spots like walls. We paddled for a few hours on that first day, taking our time, stopping along the shore once to eat a packed lunch of hard-boiled eggs and sandwiches. It was quiet. We didn't pass a single canoe or hiker the entire time. That was part of the draw. We had picked this place specifically because it was more remote. Not many people knew about it, and access required some decent map reading and planning. We had seen a couple cars at the parking area, but otherwise it felt like we had the lake to ourselves. Around 3 in the afternoon, we reached the halfway point down the lake and pulled up to a cleared campsite on the eastern shore. It was marked on an old park map I had downloaded before we left. The site had a flat open area for a tent, a fire pit made from a ring of blackened rocks, and a log bench someone had carved out of a fallen tree. The water was easy to reach, the trees tall enough to give some shade, and there were no signs of fresh footprints. It was perfect. We set up our small 2-person tent, rolled out our foam mats, and stacked our bags inside. I filtered some lake water into our bottles while Anna gathered some kindling and small sticks for a fire. Later, we sat on the log and cooked a simple dinner, rice and beans with some sausage mixed in on our tiny stove. Afterward, we watched the lake turn dark as the sun dropped behind the trees. It was still warm, but the air was starting to cool, and I could hear loons calling from down the lake. That sound always makes me stop and just listen. It's something between a song and a scream, echoing off the trees and the water. By 9 or so, it was fully dark. There was no moon yet, and the stars were just starting to show. We both had headlamps, but we mostly sat near the fire, enjoying the quiet and the smell of the wood smoke. After brushing our teeth, we crawled into the tent and zipped ourselves in for the night. I remember lying there, hearing nothing but the occasional rustle of leaves outside and a single owl hooting from somewhere up the hill. It was peaceful. Sometime after 10, I unzipped the tent as quietly as I could and stepped outside. Anna was already asleep, and I didn't want to wake her. I needed to wash my face. I had gotten some sticky tree sap on my cheek earlier when I was trying to hang our food bag, and I could still feel it. I grabbed the little camp towel and headed down to the water, maybe 10 or 15 steps from the tent. The fire had died down to glowing coals, and my headlamp was off. I liked seeing the lake in darkness. The sky was clearer now, and I could see the reflection of stars in the water. I crouched at the edge, dipped the towel in, and started wiping the sap off. I was just about to stand back up when I noticed 2 small lights across the lake. They were faint and low to the ground, like someone kneeling with headlamps on. I squinted, not sure at first if I was imagining it. But no, they were definitely there. 2 white beams moving slightly, flickering a bit. It was strange. That side of the lake had no campsites, at least none marked. The slope was steeper over there, and mostly rock and bush. I watched for maybe 10 seconds, then 20. The beams were pointing down, and then one of them tilted up briefly, like someone had turned to look at something. Then, just like that, both lights faded and disappeared completely. It wasn't like they had been turned off. It was more like they had lost power, slow and uneven. Just a dimming until the light was gone. I stood still, waiting. No more light. Just the dark woods across the water and the quiet lake in between. Then I heard it. A heavy, wet snorting sound. Loud. Not a sniff or a puff. This was more like a grunt, deep and chesty, followed by another one, louder. It echoed across the lake like someone blowing through a wide pipe. Whatever it was big. I didn't move. My eyes were fixed on the spot where I had seen the lights. Another grunt, then the sound of movement, branches cracking and dry leaves being kicked. It was slow and heavy, not the quick rustle of a deer or the small scamper of a raccoon. This was something else. Either a moose or a bear, I was sure of it. The lake was so still that the noises carried perfectly. I didn't hear any voices. No talking, no shouting, no light again. Just the heavy animal moving, then pausing, then snorting. I wasn't sure what to do. I didn't want to scare whatever or whoever was over there, but I also felt a strong urge to check if someone needed help. Something about those fading lights felt off. I cupped my hands near my mouth and called out over the water. I didn't shout, just raised my voice enough to be heard. The sound echoed, and then it was quiet again. A long minute passed, maybe longer. Then I heard a voice from the other side, faint but clear enough. It wasn't frantic or scared, more like someone responding from far away. They sounded winded. Then I heard another voice, lower, maybe a second person. It was clear now that it wasn't just an animal on that side. There were people there. I quickly walked back up to the tent and grabbed my headlamp and paddle. Anna stirred a little when I unzipped the bag, but she didn't wake. I didn't want to disturb her. I figured I'd just check things out and be back in 10 minutes. I walked down to the canoe, untied it from the tree, and pushed off gently into the black water. The lake was flat, no wind, like paddling across a giant pane of glass. Every stroke echoed. The headlamp on my forehead cut a small white cone in the darkness, showing me the ripples ahead. As I got closer to the opposite bank, I angled toward the spot where I had seen the lights. It was rockier here, and the slope rose fast from the water. I spotted 2 figures near the base of a small ridge, sitting on a flat boulder just above the shoreline. Both looked exhausted, slouched and still, like they'd been there a while. They were a man and a woman, maybe in their late 20s or early 30s, with big packs beside them. Their headlamps were off. As I approached, I could see the woman holding one in her lap, trying to fix something on the side. They looked beat, sweaty, dirty, and both breathing heavily. Their clothes were damp, and their boots were caked in mud. I didn't ask questions. I just pulled up beside the rock and told them I could take them across. They didn't argue. The man helped the woman into the canoe first, then climbed in after her. Their pack stayed on their laps. I handed them my backup flashlight so they could see once we reached the other side. The paddle back was heavier with the weight, but the lake stayed calm. No one spoke. I heard the man let out a quiet sigh, more like a release of pressure than relief. The snorting noise was gone now. Whatever animal had been nearby had moved off, but the tension still sat heavy in the canoe. You could feel it. Back at the camp, I showed them a flat patch of ground a little ways from our tent, told them they could set up there. They did. It was quick and clumsy, clearly not their first choice of location, but they were grateful to stop moving. I offered them water, which they took, and then I left them to it and crawled back into the tent beside Anna. She rolled toward me and mumbled something half asleep. I whispered that everything was okay, just some lost hikers, and I'd explain in the morning. I didn't sleep well that night, not out of fear, just restlessness. My mind kept playing the scene over. The dimming headlamps, the animals snorting, the quiet crossing of the lake. I couldn't shake the image of them sitting in the dark with their gear, waiting for something to happen, surrounded by trees and something big in the bush behind them. In the morning, I got up early and walked down to the water. Mist was rising from the lake in long, thin fingers. The other couple was already packing their gear, moving slowly. They said they had started from a trailhead much farther west, missed the right turn to the eastern shore, and ended up bushwhacking through thick undergrowth for hours. They had taken the wrong side of the lake entirely, thinking there'd be campsites or a trail. They'd lost the trail more than once and had to navigate by compass. Their headlamps had both died within minutes of each other, drained from hours of use. They hadn't even known how far they still had to go when they saw my campfire glow. I gave them directions to the correct path and offered to paddle them to the main trail on our side of the lake. They accepted. It saved them at least 3 or 4 hours of hiking, maybe more, and let them avoid doubling back past whatever animal had been in the woods. We all loaded into the canoe, and I paddled them to a spot I knew. It was the summer of 2018 when I learned to be wary of the dark woods after midnight, especially when you're alone with someone you trust but still vulnerable in the middle of nowhere. I was 24 then, my boyfriend, Mike, was 27. We loved hiking, and whenever we got free time, we tried to find new trails around our home in Oregon. That summer, one trail in particular caught our attention. A huge park with miles of winding paths, dense forests, and a wide river cutting through it. The park was popular during the day, but at night it was quiet, almost dead silent except for the occasional sounds of animals. One weekend, after a long day of hiking under the sun, we decided to stay late. I don't even know why we chose to hang out in the park so late. Maybe it was the thrill or just not wanting the day to end. Mike had brought a small backpack with some snacks and a flashlight, but we both figured we would just walk back before it got too dark. The sun set late in July, around 9:30 p.m., so we were used to being out after dark. But this time, it went further, well past midnight. We found ourselves at a clearing in the park. It was a large picnic area, with a few sturdy wooden tables arranged around a grassy patch. We could see the river nearby, the water shining silver in the moonlight that filtered down through the clouds. The river was calm, moving slowly, and at the far end, there was a thick tree line that looked almost black against the night sky. The clearing was isolated. No cars, no other people, no tents or campsites anywhere in sight. It was just us and the silent woods. We sat down at one of the picnic tables, tired and a little buzzed from a couple of beers we had shared earlier. The night air was cool but not cold. Crickets chirped softly, and occasionally an owl hooted somewhere deep in the trees. It felt peaceful at first. We joked about the day's hike and how sore our legs were. Then, without much planning, we started to get closer, the kind of close where the world around you seems to disappear. We were alone in the dark, sharing that quiet space with only the moonlight and the sound of the river. It was intimate and, for a moment, felt like the whole world had stopped. I was facing the river, watching how the light played on the water's surface. Mike was opposite me, staring into the solid black tree line. His expression changed suddenly, from relaxed to tense, and I could feel it before I saw it. He went still, almost frozen, and in a voice so low I barely heard it, he said, "There's a man coming toward us." At first, I thought he was joking. The idea of a stranger walking through the woods that late didn't seem possible. But when I turned my head toward the tree line, I saw it. Something moving quickly, confidently, straight toward us. It was a man wearing a plain white t-shirt. No jacket, no backpack, nothing that would explain why he was out here at this hour. His pace was brisk, almost too fast for casual walking, but not quite running. He wasn't looking at us, not even glancing our way, just moving forward like he knew exactly where he was going. The feeling that hit me was immediate. Fear. Not the kind of fear that creeps in slowly, but a raw, physical surge that made my heart pound and my breath catch. I knew I had to move, but my body froze for a moment, caught between wanting to run and trying to understand who this man was and what he wanted. Then, everything clicked. I jumped up from the bench and started running without looking back. I didn't know where exactly I was running to, but I had to get away. Mike was right behind me, and I knew he would catch up. His presence gave me strength, but I couldn't stop my mind from racing with all the worst possibilities. As I ran, my legs burning and my lungs gasping for air, I could feel the man's eyes on me, or at least I imagined it. Felt like he was right behind us, even though I didn't hear footsteps. The picnic tables and the clearing disappeared behind me as I plunged into the trail leading back toward the park entrance. The trees closed in tight, and the shadows seemed to press in from all sides. I didn't look back until we reached the parking lot, where a few cars sat under the dim glow of street lamps. Only when I saw the safety of the paved road and the headlights of passing cars did I finally let out a shaky breath. Mike and I didn't say a word. We just jumped into my car and locked the doors, our hands trembling as we turned on the engine. I never found out who that man was or what he wanted. We didn't call the police. It felt like there was nothing to report. No crime had been committed. No threat had been spoken aloud. Just a man walking fast through the woods in the middle of the night, silent and unknown. But the memory stayed with me, sharp and cold, like a warning I never wanted to forget. After that night, I never wanted to be anywhere in the woods after dark again. Mike and I stopped going on late-night hikes, stopped wandering into empty clearings with only moonlight to guide us. The park became a place of daylight and safety, not mystery and fear. Sometimes when I drive past the park, I look at that tree line, wondering if the man is still there, still walking, still waiting for someone to cross his path. And every time I think about it, I remind myself, some things are better left alone in the dark. When I was younger, about 20 years old, and a student at a small university tucked away in the southern Appalachian Mountains of western North Carolina, I developed a habit that I now look back on with a mix of nostalgia and caution. My friends and I loved to go hiking, especially at night. It was something of a ritual. The thrill of being alone in the wilderness after dark, the quiet, the way the forest changed under the moonlight, felt freeing, like stepping into a secret world. That year was 2004, before smartphones had taken over, before GPS was common, and before any of us had cell service that worked in those deep woods. We relied on paper maps, flashlights, and our memory. Most nights we went in groups, but I often ventured out by myself, pushed by a restless sense of adventure and a craving for solitude. One October night, I remember it clearly. The sky was perfectly clear, and the moon hung full and bright, its cold silver light bathing the landscape in an eerie glow. The temperature was mild for fall, cool but not cold, with a faint breeze rustling the last of the autumn leaves. I was feeling good that night, a little buzzed from smoking some weed earlier, but not too much, just enough to soften the edges of my thoughts, to make the world feel bigger and slower. I decided to go for a solo night hike on a trail close to campus that I knew well. A small loop about a mile long, not challenging, but deep enough into the forest to feel far from civilization. It wasn't part of any official national park or protected land, just a quiet rural patch of forest near an old logging road. The trees were a mix of tall oaks and pines, their trunks standing like silent sentinels in the moonlight. The ground was covered with a carpet of dry leaves and pine needles that cushioned my footsteps. I took a small handheld flashlight, but I barely needed it. The moonlight was bright enough to see the path ahead clearly, casting long shadows and making the forest look almost magical. The air smelled fresh and earthy, with hints of damp wood and moss. I remember feeling a strange mix of peace and excitement as I walked. The only sounds were my own footsteps and the occasional rustle of small animals moving through the underbrush. For the first half of the hike, everything felt perfect. I slowed my pace, breathing deeply, letting the night settle around me. I could see the silvery outlines of the leaves and the rough bark on the trees. The trail curved gently, and I felt completely alone but not afraid, at least not yet. I could hear distant sounds of night insects and frogs, and sometimes the soft call of an owl far off in the forest. Then, somewhere around the halfway mark, as I rounded a bend near a cluster of thick bushes, I noticed something odd. A sound, faint but unmistakable, was drifting through the trees. It was a man's voice. At first, I thought maybe it was someone else hiking nearby or a hunter, but then I realized the voice wasn't speaking, it was crying. The sound was distant, coming from somewhere off to the right side of the trail, deeper into the woods. It wasn't just quiet sobbing. It was raw and intense, full of pain and confusion, the kind of crying that felt like it had been going on for hours, maybe days. It was a strange mix of despair and madness. The voice wasn't steady, it wavered, sometimes almost breaking into gibberish, like the person was trying to hold back a scream but couldn't. It was haunting. I froze for a moment, my heart pounding. Part of me wanted to call out to see if the person needed help. I'm the kind of person who can't ignore someone in pain, especially when they're crying like that. But almost immediately, a wave of dread washed over me. My stomach tightened, and I felt an icy panic creep up my spine. I knew deep down this was not a normal situation. That voice didn't belong to someone just lost or sad. It sounded like someone completely broken, maybe dangerous or worse, someone who had been living alone in those woods for a long time. My mind raced through all the stories I had heard about hermits, drifters, and people who'd slipped into madness in the mountains. Despite the fear, I didn't move. I just stood there, barely breathing, listening to the cries echoing through the trees. The night was so still that the sound seemed to fill everything. The air, the leaves, the ground beneath me. I was hyper-aware of every little noise I made, careful not to snap a twig or rustle the leaves. My hands trembled as I gripped the flashlight, which I still hadn't turned on. My brain was telling me to turn and run, but my body was frozen, trapped between fear and empathy. I remember thinking, if I make a sound, if I call out, he'll know I'm here, and that thought terrified me. The sobbing sounded like it had been going on forever, as if the man was caught in some endless loop of grief and madness. I didn't want to see him. I didn't want to confront whatever was making that noise. So I slowly turned around and began to retrace my steps, moving as quietly and carefully as possible. The crying followed me for a while, distant but persistent, like a dark cloud hanging over the forest. Every step I took felt heavier. The silence of the woods was no longer peaceful but charged with tension. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see a figure suddenly appear behind a tree or leap out from the shadows. My mind imagined wild-eyed faces, wild hair, desperate and dangerous. Thankfully, the further I moved away, the more the crying faded, until it was just a faint sound swallowed by the night. When I finally reached my car, parked at the edge of the trailhead, I was shaking. My hands fumbled with the keys as I locked the doors and sat down inside. The adrenaline coursing through me made my chest feel tight, and for the first time, the panic that had been simmering inside broke loose. I sat there for a long time, breathing hard, staring at the dark forest beyond the windshield. I thought about that man, whoever he was, still out there crying, alone in the woods. The thought made my skin crawl. I never found out what had happened to him, and I never went back to that trail at night alone again. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had called out or shown my flashlight. Would he have come out of the shadows? Would he have been hurt or angry or worse? Would I have been in real danger? I don't regret leaving that night, even though it still haunts me sometimes. It taught me to respect the wilderness and to listen to that inner voice when it tells you to get out. The mountains are beautiful and peaceful, but they can also hide real, human darkness, the kind that doesn't need ghosts or monsters to make you afraid.